calling this meeting to order. And we have some administrative business. This is the only meeting of the year I gavel in, so I probably won't do it very well. I'm going to start this evening's school committee meeting by reading a letter from Patrick Ward, town clerk, confirming the election. So the certificate of election and oath of office, May 10th, 2018. I, Patrick J. Ward, town clerk of the town of Brookline, duly qualified and acting as such as having custody of the records, hereby certify that at the May 8th, 2018 annual town election held in accordance with MGL C41 Section 1, Jennifer L. Monopoly, David Arenas Perlman, and Barbara C. Scotto were elected members of the school committee for the town of Brookline. I further certify in accordance with MGL C41 Section 15 that on May 9th, 2018, Jennifer L. Monopoly and David Arenas Perlman, and on May 10th, 2018, Barbara C. Scotto were sworn to the faithful performance of their duties as members of the school committee for the town of Brookline. Attest, Patrick J. Ward, town clerk. So let me also congratulate our three members of the school committee, our re-elected Ms. Scotto and our new members, Jennifer and David. Congratulations on your election to the school committee. So now it is the responsibility of the school committee to elect a chair and vice chair. The chair and vice chair are to be elected for a one-year term by a majority of those members present, and that unless a vote is taken to the contrary, no member may serve for chairman as for more than 2 consecutive one-year terms. So we will begin with the chair of the school committee. Are there any nominations for chair of the school committee? Ms. Ditkoff?
Thank you. It's my pleasure to nominate David Pollock as chair of the school committee for the 2018-2019 year. Like many people in Brookline, Mr. Pollock is not nearly as accomplished as his wife. His wife is a legitimate rock star physician. She's path breaking. She is world renowned, but she didn't run for school committee. You did, and so we're delighted to have you representing the family. Mr. Pollock was 1 year as vice chair, and he spent the last year as chair. And there are some things that people know about him, which is that he is he and his firm AIA award-winning architects, which we need at this point in the school committee's trajectory in our priorities, but he is also a lecturer, a higher education in architecture, so he has classroom experience in higher education, which is a pretty valuable asset for us as well. He comes to the school committee having represented many parts of our community, so I'm delighted of the community voice that he brings, having spent a decade on the Brookline Education Foundation board and board of overseers, the Brookline Music School affiliation, a decade on the building commission, and so many places where David's experience is very valuable to us, and just the rooms he's in and the voices that he hears not only in his own head, but from other people, are very valuable to us. He is also a parent and a former Brookline parent, and has 2 wonderful adult children who are launched in their lives, and so he brings that perspective as well of the alumni experience. So it's my pleasure to nominate David, and I hope there's a second.
This time, is there a second? Schreiner Oldham. Any further discussion?
Any other nominations?
Any other nominations? Okay, first I need to ask for a vote to close the nominations. All those in favor of closing the nominations? All those opposed? And abstentions? I didn't count. Ms. Coyne? Okay. Ms. Coyne, would you please poll the committee on a roll call vote for the office of chair?
Yes.
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 Yes. Enthusiastically, yes.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Now I'd like to ask the committee if there are any nominations for vice chair. Mr. Glover?
Yes, I'm very pleased to nominate Julie Schreiner-Oldham as our vice chair for the 2018-2019 year. It is incredible to think that Ms. Schreiner-Oldham has only been on this committee for maybe a year and a half. Is that maybe not even a year and a half? Yeah, because in that time she's really more than proven her value to this committee, to the schools, and to this town. She has been incredibly hardworking in all facets of what we do here, and has been ready, willing, and able to jump into the real thick of what we do, including most recently co-chairing the override study committee that eventually led to the successful override that we just had. So we're thankful to her for that, as well as all of the other things that she does. She is also a parent. She's a parent of 3 girls, all in the Brookline system. One of whom, Mackenzie, is often a witness to what we do here, and all of us have been just as excited to get to know Mackenzie as we have to get to know Ms. Schreiner-Oldham. So with that, I'm thrilled to nominate Julie Schreiner-Oldham for vice chair.
Is there a second? Ms. Scotto? Any discussion? Any additional nominations? So first, a vote to close nominations. All those in favor of closing nominations for vice chair? It is unanimous. Ms. Coyne, would you please poll the committee and roll call vote for the office of vice chair?
Yes.
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 Just as enthusiastically, yes.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you very much. My 5 minutes with the gavel are over. Let's first, Ms. Schreiner-Oldham, a round of applause. And I will turn the gavel over to the chair.
All right. I have my cheat sheet here, and so I would like to ask for a vote to appoint the executive assistant to serve in the office of secretary of the school committee, and I would like to nominate Ms. Robin Coyne and ask for a second. Mr. Glover, thank you so much. Robin, as I said to Ms. Monopoly a few days ago, she sort of makes our world go round on school committee, and solves our problems, answers our questions, and makes sure that we do our jobs, which is really important. And I'm very grateful for her support year round for the work that we do. So let's have a vote. I think it doesn't say we need a roll call on this, so all in favor? All right, that is unanimous. Thank you very much. All right, so just in a couple of words, thank you for the vote of confidence in making me chair of the school committee for another year. I feel very humble about it. I think I got through the last year successfully. I think we did good work last year, and I managed to not trip over my shoes or fall on my face. And I felt for most of the year that I was really kind of learning everything one step along. It was my 5th year on school committee, but it was really new, and I'd been a vice chair, but it was still a totally new experience, a lot of new stuff to do, and I'm really excited about now knowing how to do the job and supporting all of you and all of us together to do some really solid work this year. So let's get at it. We have a calendar. which takes us through pretty much the end of the school year, which is June 26th. That's the last day of school. Lots of subcommittee meetings. These are still coming up and are posted. Yeah, we'll get there. The town meeting, as everybody knows, is coming up. It starts on May 22nd, Tuesday night, May 22nd, and is, in my opinion, looking at the 38 warrant articles, is certainly going to go 3 nights on the 22nd, 24th, and then again on the Tuesday of the following week. I think Ms. Scotto and Mr. Perlman, my colleagues on town meeting as well as school committee, probably all share the hope that it won't actually need a 4th night on the 31st, because we actually have school committee scheduled at the same time as the 4th night of town meeting. They're right now they're competing, but I'm hoping that our newly re-elected moderator, Sandy Gadsby, will gavel us closed in 3 nights, and we'll be able to have our school committee meeting on the 31st, because I'm actually not sure what we'll do if they're both still out there. This weekend we have the Hidden Brookline History of Slavery and Freedom walking tour at 10 o'clock in front of Town Hall. I encourage everybody to participate. And we have high school graduation coming up quickly on Sunday, June 3rd. And then I will just ask my colleagues if there are other calendar items that they want to point our attention to. Yes.
So
Yes.
I'd like to highlight the 30-year staff recognition on June 19th. This is something we've been doing now, I think, for about 15 years at least, probably a few more, maybe 20. To take a little bit of credit for it, one time a teacher pointed out to me, I've worked here 30 years and nobody's done anything. And I said to myself, we have to start to do something. So we determined at that time to recognize teachers who have been in the system for 30 years. And it's been amazing to have those events, and I think it's been really good. In the beginning there were a lot more. Now there are many fewer than for 30 years. But so that's on June 19th. Begins before the school committee meeting to get here at 5:30 and continues into the school committee meeting.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to add that on the Hidden Brookline History, it's been very popular, and they've added a 1 o'clock tour as well. So I think the 10 o'clock is sold out. I'm not sure, but they did add a 1 o'clock.
Okay, so that's our calendar. We have a consent agenda with 2 items on it, and often we just vote the consent agenda, but because we have new school committee members, we can slow it down a little bit. The first is the past record, which is another word for minutes. That's our minutes from March 22nd. And the second is change order number 2 for the devotion school project, which is $143,000 or something like that, which sounds like a lot of money, but it's a $90 million construction budget, and this is a lot of small items, and the actual memorandum from the architect was sent out to school committee, so you guys had a chance to look at it, but if anybody has any questions, Ms. Charlepsky is ready to take them on. Okay, so I would entertain a motion on the consent agenda. Yes, Mr. Lever.
Could you just remind me what some of the items were in the change order?
A lot of them are small changes for plugs that are in the wrong place, some things that were unforeseen conditions. I'm trying to think what else some of them were. Most of them were unforeseen conditions. There
were some owner-initiated changes, adding things that people wanted.
And some deletions that happened within this too. I don't know if you have more to say, Mr. Bopp, because I know that you were at the school with Tony. So,
I mean, the 2 biggest ones were $26,000, where they had to add a floor leveling compound because the the fire-treated plywood and the glue wasn't compatible with the resilient flooring on top, so they, that was $26,000, and then $15,000 to actually change. It was change the flooring to a more desirable, change it from carpet to resilient. Otherwise, it's $2,000, $3,000, $7,000. It's really pretty routine, and I guess we'll hear a little bit more about it. But everything I've seen driving by, and I've heard from Superintendent Bott and from Ms. Harlevsky and other people, is that it's like it is really humming over there. And the work is getting done, and it's very exciting. There's lots of site work going on right now.
Do you want me to share now?
Sure.
Yeah, I was going to share later in the superintendent report, but I'll share this part now. I had the chance to go through the building with Tony Quigley, the town's project manager for the building department, and what Mr. Pollock just described is accurate. The building really is humming. The Zaftig side of the building is nearly complete, and it's sort of through the building over to Stedman, and there are people working everywhere. The hope is to have the central, in the 1912 building ready for offices to start moving in early summer, with the project completed before school starts, and everyone still believes that despite the work that still needs to be done, that the building will be ready for occupancy in August so that the moving can happen and school can open. And outside work, if you remember, there were some challenges with Eversource doing some of the street work that they needed to do, and Eversource did move the poles, put new poles in. Actually today and tomorrow they're removing the old poles, rehanging the lines, and that allowed a lot of the outside work to continue. The area for the turf field, for example, behind the school is getting close to being ready for turf. The drainage is done, et cetera. So it's fantastic. I want to say this is in the superintendent report. On May 22nd, Tuesday, May 22nd at 3:30, the principals of lower and upper devotion, working with the building department and the contractor, have arranged for work to end that day at 3:30, so all devotion school staff can take a tour of the building and start to get a sense of what all the built-ins. There's an incredible amount of built-in cabinetry, storage, built-in bookcases. There are, every classroom has a touch screen, backlit smart board, smart technology, so people can start seeing where everything is hung in the classroom, sinks in all the room, etc. Project spaces in the hallways, community spaces in the hallways. It is a remarkable design. It is beautiful. And so the tour is at 3:30 for all devotion school staff, and I want to extend the invitation to the committee to join. You just have to meet at the building, and I believe it will start at the back entrance on Stedman Street, which will be the entrance into the cafeteria, so the back corner on Stedman.
I think just one other piece to keep in mind. The total contract for the contractor at this time is $90,321,448.65. The change orders, we have a contingency, as you remember, for the change orders, and I think it's about a 10% contingency on construction. So we're well within our budget, but we do keep an eye on it and make sure that what the changes are changes that we need to pay and not others. So, thank you.
I just also add that the furniture is going to be delivered in 3 shifts, and the first shift of furniture delivery, the new furniture, is scheduled about 4 weeks from now, and that will be in the Zaftig side of the building. We'll get furniture first.
Okay, on the motion on the consent agenda, we're just racing along here. We're almost done with the consent agenda. All in favor? It is unanimous. Thank you very much. It is time for public comment. And there's always a sign up over by the door. Sometimes there's multiple ones and can be confusing, but people are welcome to sign up for a public comment, and people are welcome to make public comment even if they didn't sign up. Public comment is a time really for the school committee to hear from the community, and generally isn't a time of dialogue. And depending on how many people sign up, the amount of time we can allow is variable, but there's only one person signed up so far today, so it's basically 3 to 5 minutes and as much time as you need. So Karen or Corrine Gibbs, please come to the microphone, tell us who you are, and we love to hear from you.
Make sure the microphone's turned on.
Is it green?
Hello, I'm Dr. Corrine Gibbs. I have lived on Rawson Road on Aspinwall Hill since 2009, when my husband and I bought our place. I'm a professional scientist, I'm a professor, I'm an educator, and I'm also a parent. My older daughter is in first grade at Runkle. I am here to speak about the proposed policies for home instruction and for student discipline in Brookline. First, I am disappointed that these policies were not more broadly distributed to the community directly from the superintendent's office, and that I had to find it out through the PTO mailing list on election week. This should have been sent to the parents, teachers, and community educators as early as possible, so that we could have attended the subcommittees that were discussing these items. Second, I have read both draft policies in depth multiple times. Both policies, in my opinion, are a bit draconian under the veil of ensuring equity. And in my job, I can tell you, I have to face inequity all the time. I think detailed policies might be needed, but I think we need to also importantly focus on preventing the need of such policies. Indeed, these policies are being discussed and proposed, and as a parent, it's not clear how we're first addressing in a positive manner the underlying issues that might cause socioeconomic and or racial and or cultural biases and assumptions about our children. I strongly urge the committee, Mr. Bott and his staff, to see these draft policies as the start of a public comment period for revisions that will continue beyond the summer months. I would like to remind you that many parents are traveling and juggling childcare options during the summer, and so our focus cannot always be on attending every subcommittee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Superintendent Bott, I think you could certainly share that with the public.
So I just want to, typically we don't respond, but wanted to share to your points. I'll be sharing with the committee later tonight a proposal to more broadly get feedback and slow down the process so that feedback can be gathered in a really constructive way. The policy, both things that, poke holes in it, right? What are the areas that need strength? So this is really, to your final point of public comment, this is really a starting point. And if the policy does need to go into the fall before approval, it will need to go into the fall. So I think just that's coming later for a discussion later tonight. But in case you had to leave, I wanted to assure you that actually is there are many steps yet to come. Specifically for the discipline policy.
And if you want to have a copy of the superintendent's report, you don't have to stick around because it's always included in the minutes. Is there anyone else who would like to make public comment? Okay, thank you very much. Our first item is a discussion and possible vote to name the Lawrence School Library. Ms. Charlevsky.
Thank you. At your desks, you all have some backup information, and for people who are sitting here, just to explain, the capital subcommittee of the school committee, for the guidelines of the naming spaces policy, met and discussed the possibility of naming a space at the Lawrence School Library. There was a petitioner, Marie Lehman, who's here today and will be speaking. And I see a number of other people who may also want to say some words to this request for naming of the Lawrence School Library for Iris Feldman, who was the librarian for over 30 years at the Lawrence School, who passed away just recently, but was retired at least 3 years ago. If you look at our policy, one of the things that the policy that this particular naming would apply to has to do with and hold on, an individual who has demonstrated lengthy or exemplary service to the students of Brookline, provided the named honoree has not served in the public schools of Brookline for a minimum of 2 years prior to his or her nomination to be honored with the naming of a space. And there was a purpose for having the 2 years. Sometimes in the, when something happens, or when somebody leaves, there's all sorts of excitement, and then afterwards people sort of, the reality sets in. And we felt that if after 2 years people felt the same, then this was an important nomination and something that we should be considering. So, as I said, Ms. Feldman has retired at least, I think, 5 years ago, or 2000. Well, time flies when you're having fun. It was just a few years ago, and she just passed away, unfortunately. And so will be. Anyway, so this came to the Capital Subcommittee. We discussed it and voted to move it to this full school committee. We felt that it was appropriate, and I think what would be good is if we could hear from the proponent who is asking for it, and maybe 1 or 2 other people.
So my name is Marie Lehman, and I'm a 3rd grade teacher at Lawrence School. I've been there for 26 years, but I think I'd like to transfer to devotion. So thank you to the school committee for putting this on the agenda so quickly. And I had emailed Andrew in March, and at the time I didn't realize that Iris's family and friends were planning to have a memorial for her at the Lawrence School Library in May. So when I met with Helen and the subcommittee, I asked if they could get it on quickly so we could, if it is approved, that we could announce it at that time. But thank you all, and congratulations to the new school committee members. Shortly after Iris passed, it might have been a day or 2 after, I went to our Lawrence School Library, and Kathy, who's our librarian now, she had made up a beautiful little, a little sign, a little poster, and she put it in a nice little plastic stand with some flowers, and it just had some beautiful things about Iris. And I thought, so many people in school now haven't met her, but they've heard of her, they know of her legacy. And I started thinking, what can we do to honor her and preserve that legacy? And so that's when I first contacted Andrew. I hope that, many people told me they were going to write letters in support, and hopefully you got some of those. And they were all beautiful, and I have some here, and I don't want to read them all because I know it's very time consuming. The thread of all the letters was that Iris was really the heart and soul of Lawrence School, and particularly the library. The library was the heart of the school, and she just put every ounce of her energy into it. She was just, I've never seen her not smiling. She was enthusiastic. She made so many valuable connections to students, and in all the letters that I got, the thread was that she was the heart and soul of the library. She was an inspiration to many. Letter from Linda Goldman, the literacy specialist, talked about how they collaborated. Linda is an esteemed Caverly Award-winning literacy specialist who collaborated with Iris many times over the years. They had a children's literature group that I was a part of that was incredible. Just amazing resource Iris was. She just left such a mark, I think, on everybody. And my favorite letter was when I put it out to Lawrence School that, we were doing this, and just so that everybody would know that this was happening, I received an email from Jillian Coggeshall, who is a 2nd grade teacher at Lawrence. She's out on maternity leave right now. And I had asked people if they had any questions. I said, if you have any questions, you can contact me. And Jillian wrote back and she said, I don't have any questions, but just wanted to say how much this makes my heart happy. And it really touched me. She said she was actually a student when Iris was a librarian. She said she was one of my favorite people in my time as a student at Lawrence. She took time to help me find series that interested me and that I might try, despite the walls I had put up around reading. So Jillian was somebody who is very honest about her difficulties with reading, and I just think, she speaks to how Iris helped her. She also said she volunteered a time as the mascot of the Great Bear Race every year. I only know because I ran it, and she would cheer me on. She said she was such a warm and safe presence at Lawrence, and I miss her. I can't think of a more fitting way to honor her than to name our library in her memory. So that was really one of my favorites. But, I have memories like that of Iris when she dressed up like Waldo on Halloween, and she was just always such a loving, caring, incredible, enthusiastic presence at Lawrence School. So, like I said, when Kathy did that, I thought, we need to do something to really make her legacy lasting. And so most people that wrote the letters, I'm sure you saw, they said they couldn't think of a more fitting way or a more deserving person to honor. So I really hope you'll consider doing this. Kathy, did you want to say anything?
I don't have too much to add.
Well, it's interesting because Rusty Browder also wrote a letter, and she was the librarian after Iris, and then followed by Kathy, and the three of them met, and
we would get
often
together.
they would get together, and so it's such a nice collaboration. But yeah.
The only thing I would add is in my letter, which is that she was my librarian when I was at Lawrence School as a student. So I started there in 1974, and I graduated in 1982, and she was the librarian it was her one professional job as a librarian for the Brookline Public Schools at Lawrence School. To me, she is the library. The materials that are there are still useful. The materials that she picked out, folk tales and traditional tales and those classic picture books, I know she had her hands on all of them, and there's something about that tradition and the passing on from Iris to Rusty to me which is really just fabulous and unique, and that's really all I have to add. I mean, she was just everything that Marie described, both when I was a student and then very generous to me when I became the librarian there in terms of the history of the place and keeping with traditions, and just so excited that I had this role, a student of hers. And I said in the letter, she had this way of like leaning into you when she listened to you. But that as a student, it made you feel really important. And as an adult, it made you feel really important because she was always interested in what you had to say, what's going on at Lawrence. In my opinion, she is the Lawrence School Library, and it would be great to honor her in this way. Thank you.
We also have Mari Sapoznik here, who was our vice principal during the time of Iris. So thank you.
As Marie said, I'm Maury Sapoznik. I was the vice principal at the Lawrence School from 1980, I'm trying to think, 83 plus 5 is 88, from 2006. So I knew Iris. And I mean, she was wonderful. And as was just pointed out, she was that was her only job, okay? However, I've taken a new lease on life. I run a store called the Olive Connection. And when parents come into my store and I tell them that we're thinking about doing this, they say it's a no-brainer. I mean, this woman demands that kind of respect. She was wonderful. She was heartful. She wanted the school to be better. So I just ask you, to think about what it means to name a school, name something after a school. She's the epitome of that. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maureen. Ms. Scotto.
I knew Iris as well. In part of my career, I worked in the Driscoll Library, and I have I have a foot in the library world and a foot in the education world. And the thing about Iris is that she, in a sense, was the quintessential librarian. Not only did she know books and could recommend them to children, she understood children and she understood parents. But when you think about it, there are children who find the library as the most comforting place to be in school if they have a librarian who understands them, talks to them, hands books to them, and nurtures them. And as much as we would like all children to feel nurtured in their classroom, sometimes they need a little extra piece of that. And Iris would give that to them. She is one of the sweetest, kindest women you would ever meet. And I think this is a perfect way to honor her memory. So I would urge the school committee to do this, to vote for this.
So are there any other questions or thoughts? I think then I would like to have the honor of moving that we have an actual wording for what we're doing. That we vote to name the Lawrence School Library the Iris Feldman Library, and the sign to be put up by the proponents, and in conjunction with the building department. And I'm thrilled to do it because I too knew Iris. I didn't know her as well as you, but she was really a very special person.
Thank you. Ms. Scotto seconds. And all in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Before we go on to our next agenda item, Ms. Scotto just wants to share a few words with us.
You know, it's a sad follow-up to talking about Iris, because we have lost another wonderful person who was very important in the Brookline schools, and that is Kim Michelson. Kim Michelson died very suddenly, I think in the last couple of days, and she was a school committee member for a number of years. Her children were Driscoll students, and I taught one of them. She was a woman who, if you'd sit down and talk to her, you would walk away from that conversation having learned something, and I don't mean in a didactic sense, but in her interpretation of the world and of people and of what was going on around her. She was such a kind, thoughtful, deep-thinking person. And she did serve on the school committee for, I don't know how, Helen, do you know how long?
I'm pretty sure it was 2 terms.
For 2
6
terms.
years.
And I think that we are very lucky in Brookline that we have people like Kim Michelson who devote some time to serving on the school committee and who support the kind of education, the kind of excellence in education that we would offer. She had 3 girls who went through the school. She had recently moved with her husband to Israel, and they were living in Israel, and this was a very sudden death. But I know one of her daughters, Emily, whom I happen to teach in 5th grade, is a professor at a university in London. She has 2 other children, 2 other girls besides Emily, and I don't know them. But I think it is important for us to recognize people who have really contributed to the school committee and the Brookline schools, even if we have to do it at such a sad moment. So,
thank you. All right. We are now taking up once again Town Meeting Article 23, the renaming of the Edward Devotion School. And I have both Ms. Wolf-Ditkoff and Ms. Charlupsky down to carry us through this.
I don't know who starts. Me? Well, why don't I start with what the task force talked about at the last meeting. I think it's in your packet, the report that we wrote about Edward Devotion, and it's not here. No. Did you include it? It is. I'm sorry. Yeah. So maybe if it pleases the chair, maybe I'll take the time to actually read it. Would that be okay, or do you think that people have had?
No, the new
Excuse
me. The new summary report from the task
Correct.
force. No, I think your task force worked hard, and I think it's
Okay.
fine to read it into the public record.
Well, that's what I'd like to do. So on April 30th, we met. We had put together this recommendation and actually wordsmithed it and went through it. So this is what I'm going to be sharing with you now. The ad hoc task force on school names established by the Brookline School Committee on March 22nd voted unanimously on April 24th, excuse me, I had the wrong date, to recommend that the school committee vote favorably on town meeting warrant Article 23, calling for the removal of Edward Devotion's name from the Edward Devotion School. The devotion question is only one part of the work of the task force, as everybody probably here remembers. The task force was charged with examining the names of all of the Brookline schools and will continue to meet and to research school names and the naming process. We have been doing that and have 2 more meetings set up that I think was on the calendar, if I'm not mistaken. The task force members, to remind everybody, are a representative, diverse group of Brookline citizens and interested parties. They include myself, who's a school committee member and the chair of the committee, Hidden Brookline Chair Barbara Brown, Dr. Barbara Brown, Brookline High School history teacher and Devotion alum Malcolm Cawthorn, who's also a parent of Devotion children, past Devotion teacher, vice principal, and principal John Dempsey, Brookline Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations Director Lloyd Gelano, Devotion alum, community member, town meeting member Mark Gray, who is here with us today, Devotion Steps to Success parent Misty Janes, Brookline Historical Society President Ken Liss, a Devotion student Farah Mamadova, a Devotion parent community member Pam Roberts, and Brookline High School student Sari Gubar. The task force conducted research on the legacy of Edward Devotion. Edward Devotion's father, or grandfather, it's not clear whom, was a French Huguenot who came to Brookline from France at a time when Protestants were being persecuted. He was an early settler in the Muddy River hamlet, which in 1705, as everybody knows, became the town of Brookline. The school is named after either his son or his grandson. This is a sort of a debate on the names because it's the same name that keeps on popping up. But it's named after the second Edward Devotion, 1668 to 1744. It was his birth and death. The second Edward Devotion was a resident of colonial Brookline who held several offices in town, I added that, and who left money in his will for the town toward the establishment of a school in the center of town, which was then actually Walnut Street. It wasn't where the present Devotion School is. An inventory of his property compiled after his death included land, livestock, household goods, and 1 Negro valued at 30 pounds. For the school committee here, there's an attached chronology on the next page of Edward Devotion and what happened actually with the money, with the property that became money that the town used for various purposes along the way. The task force was working under a tight deadline ahead of the school committee's discussion and possible vote on April 26th, less than a month before town meeting. The task force carried out its work in a thoughtful and respectful manner despite the urgency. The task force listened to current and former students, parents, and teachers at the school and to other members of the community. There are strong opinions and emotions on both sides of this question, but the members of the task force felt the reasons for changing the name outweighed those for keeping the name, for keeping it the same. The local debate is taking place amid a national conversation on the propriety of honoring slaveholders and supporters of slavery on public and private buildings and monuments. The devotion question provides an opportunity to recognize and discuss the fact that slavery and its legacy had and have an impact in Brookline as well as nationally. The minutes of the task force and documents compiled by its members are available on the school committee website. A fuller report on the task force charged to look at all Brookline schools' names will be forthcoming, meaning when we finish our work. Given the upcoming school committee meeting, the task force members felt it was important to make our recommendation known even before this full report could be written. So we voted this last time, and I think the next part we voted to support Article 23. The reason that my understanding is that we're back talking about this today is because the Article 23 has changed with some substance, and so therefore we need to reconsider, I think, the new article. And that I'll leave to you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's not a reconsideration per se. It's just the vote is moot now, so we need to create a new vote. So if you look at your place, Article 23, the way it was originally worded, is it's on what's called page 23-1, and then there's a description. But if you keep going to 23-2, in the middle of the page, you will see the new language, the motion to be offered by the petitioners. So again, we've already supported this overwhelmingly, but since it's changed substantially and we have new members, but the former rather than the latter is also true, but we have to revote it because of the former reason. As I would read out the motion that was worked out by the town moderator, by the petitioners, and some other people who were working to try to make this something that we could, that is implementable and kind of honors the spirit of what we're trying to do. So I won't rehash all of the arguments that we made last time for why this was an important thing to do, unless someone wants me to, in which case I'm delighted to. I'd be very happy to. But here's the language, which is voted that the town change the name of the Edward Devotion School to a name to be selected by the school committee after receiving public input through a process to be determined by the school committee. Town meeting hereby requests the naming committee to consider the name so selected by the school committee and make a recommendation to town meeting with respect thereto at the 2019 annual town meeting, which is May of 2019. In the interim, the name of the school shall be, and then there's sort of a blank, and it's our, we've been requested, since we're the ones that have to put forward a name, to put forward a name. And the name that's been discussed is something that is geographic, something fairly straightforward, that isn't going to get anyone, light anyone's fires in any way, shape, or form. It's not going to make anybody happy or sad, but it is, the name that we have at this point is the Coolidge Corner School. And so the idea would be that that would be the name for the upcoming school year, and that at the no later than the 2019 annual town meeting, which is May, town meeting, we would go through kind of the process, and town meeting would vote a new name. So I'm happy to offer that. So I think that is the language. So what we would need to do is, number one, this have a possible vote on the interim name for the devotion school. So that would be, that would be the Coolidge Corner School. So I'll start with that motion, and we can discuss it and then vote it however we wish. And then we will consider the full warrant article, which includes the motion to be made by the petitioners, and whether we support that or we not support it. So does that make sense process-wise? Okay. So let me move that we that the school committee would vote on the Coolidge Corner School would be the interim name for the Edward Devotion School.
Is there a second? Mrs. Schreiner-Oldham.
Do you want to have a discussion? Does anybody have?
Last time, I think we just talked about doing a little bit of additional research on, and just want to know if that was done and if there was anything to note.
We asked Mr. Liss, and the Coolidge brothers lived in town after slavery was abolished in Massachusetts, so that issue is not an issue. In terms of other issues, there were none that he brought up.
Right.
You know, any other sort of problematic piece, but it's named after Coolidge Corner, rather, which obviously is named after Mr. Coolidge, the Coolidge brothers, but.
As long as nothing
Right.
came up, that's,
Right.
I'm good.
We
Wanted to
do
double check. It would
Yes.
be embarrassing to put
Yes.
forward a name. that
Absolutely.
turned out
I
to not
mean,
be
you know,
something.
one can never know for sure on anything, but as far as we know today, that's what we know.
Right. And so the standard in the naming criteria is not perfection. That's not what that's not the standard. There is additional information from Mr. Liss, which I can read to you out. It's a paragraph if anybody wants. Otherwise, we can keep moving. But anyway, the point was that there were in the, I will, let me just read it. I'm not going to editorialize. So this says from Mr. Liss, here is the paragraph describing the Coolidges from a 1902 address, which is from Charles Stearns, which he read at the Brookline Historical Society. So this is somebody who was not a contemporary of the events that he's talking about. I've not seen any other references to the Coolidges and their opinions about the Civil War. He was drawing from his own memory. He was born in 1837 and lived a long life, dying in Brookline in 1935. So the speech was some 50 years later. So I'll read the quotation. Another great addition to our neighborhood was the opening of the store on the corner of Beacon and Harvard Streets in 1857. It was kept for years by William Coolidge, who was for a time one of the assessors of the town. The old store with its town pump in front and its hay scales was a familiar landmark and was torn down only a few years ago, 1902, to make room for the S.S. Pierce's massive building. The store was a great place to gather the neighbors who were mostly farmers on a rainy day or in winter time, and many a good story has been told about around the old stove. Mr. Coolidge was a Democrat, and several of the near neighbors were of the same political belief early in the Civil War, as many of you will remember. Party feelings were strong and high, and these neighbors were called Copperheads, and the store was dubbed the Confederate Crossroads. I will say, however, that as the war went on, there were no better citizens or more zealous patriots than these same Democrats. So, under the theory that no one is perfect, there was some discussion about whether this was sufficiently innocuous, maybe that's the right word. And it's my understanding, although we do have the petitioners here, if they'd like to say anything, that this more or less felt like the appropriate name. The Coolidge Corner School? Path of Least Resistance. All right, so this, okay. So that's where the research landed. Yes. Well, so that was the question, which was this sufficiently acceptable? And the general sense seemed to be that it was.
So I just had a quick question. So I think you just answered it, but I just wanted to make sure the petitioners are okay with this.
Do you want to come up?
And
also here, maybe we can ask them.
The devotion community, has that been run by them at all? Or
I'll answer that one, although we have members of the
you.
devotion committee here also.
I'm happy to see the parents. So yes, we did discuss it. My name's Deborah Brown. I am one of the petitioners. I also did a little quick research on Mr. Coolidge. Nothing came up. I actually looked at some books I had about slavery in New England, and again, the name did not come up. I asked a question about them being good Democrats, which wasn't necessarily a good thing during the Civil War, but they were Copperheads and, by all accounts, stand-up citizens of Brookline. So I support it. Anne supports it. She's not here, but we talked about it at some length.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. We also do have some parents here. School committee members attended both the Devotion Site Council meeting and the Devotion PTO meeting for about 2.5 hours a couple weeks ago, all told. And we do have some representatives, Ms. Raymer, others, if any of you wants to say anything about this. I think the notion was that I heard loud and clear was support for the name change, but also a real focus from that community that the interim name not be the focus of discussion, that we not spend a lot of time on an interim name, that there's the community rallying together, could imagine rallying together around the naming process going forward for the new name for the school. But it was also very clear that people are very focused on getting the buildings back together, moving out of their current spaces, moving into their new spaces, and bringing the community together. So there was discussion about how this conversation, the permanent naming conversation, could be part of that community building process, but that the interim process people wanted to be sort of short and sweet to whatever extent possible. Is that fair?
And are we going to put up that temporary sign or something that says Coolidge Corner is a school?
Corner School.
Yeah, is that what we're going to do?
So one of the things that we had asked Ms. Bueller, who's the principal, and Mr. O'Hara, who's the principal, and Ms. Crowley, who's the principal for now, although she is going to Lawrence, is to work with the superintendent to put together kind of a full and thoughtful list of what are the kinds of things that need to change. And it's everything from big and small. So lots of people are concerned about stationery. Weirdly, stationery keeps coming up. We're going to buy new stationery. Stationery is consumable. That's not really the biggest problem that we have. But at any rate, we're on it. We're on the stationery. But I think there are a number of other pieces. For example, what will be on the diplomas of the graduates in June? They have already been printed with the Devotion name. What will be on the diplomas of the graduates next year? So I think there are just a lot of details to work out that are very important. What happens when a student walks in with Devotion gear on next year? How do we how is this presented to them in an age-appropriate way? And more importantly, I think, what is the pedagogical process? What's the pedagogical process that the community needs to and can go through over the course of this time period to both appropriately recognize why this is happening, and also what some of the implications are for a naming process. Can we think of essay contests? Can we think of teach-in sort of learning days? Like how do we kind of make this an educational process that's age appropriate for the students and appropriately involving students, parents, alumni, and that sort of thing. So I think all of that, there are pieces of that in process. I don't know if you want to speak to any of it now, or okay.
All of that, and relative to I think your specific question about the signage on the outside of the school, I think that the building department and the school department imagine something temporary, not spending the money to carve. It is what will end up being the main entry for the vast majority of members of the Devotion community is that back entrance I mentioned earlier off of Stedman, and it is a pretty sophisticated sign, backlit, carved into metal. And it seems that what makes the most sense is to actually hold in reserve the dollars for finishing that sign, and simply putting just a piece of metal over it for now with some type of high quality banner, but a banner that would be there for a year.
And just as a reminder for our two new members, there was a fair amount of not fair amount. There was some naming, Devotion name, a big D, kind of soccer field, basketball court sort of thing. And a couple months ago, the school committee and the building committee, and Mr. Quigley, sort of put the hold on all of those things, so that in the interest of not redoing, not re-spending tens of thousands of dollars, that was kind of the decision made a little while ago. So I think the notion is to continue to hold that money aside until this process is complete, and let this play out.
There's also a lot of excitement among members of the Devotion community, teachers who have some really exciting ideas on how to include students in the process, and I think that it is a really large-scale version of what we see smaller scale. So, for example, we're exploring at a school the possibility of launching compostable straws or paper straws in response to students who wrote letters and advocated for it. And so if you think about that taken to scale and the process of really researching and understanding and advocating for somebody who you believe rises to the level of having a school named after them and what that means in a community, there's some really, really exciting opportunities and great ideas. And so there's a lot of process, as Ms. Dickhoff laid out. There are a lot of pieces that are being considered. But what is most important, I think, at Devotion, in particular in that naming process, is how educators are really leading that process with students, and then what supports need to be provided by the district around that process, so around educators and around students, so that really authentic work within the community can happen. And I will add, through principals and through Jeff Tagnell, we are working to make sure, I think I've mentioned to the committee, I know I've mentioned that we have an outstanding unit that was written by educators in 3rd grade in Brookline, which teaches specifically about the history of slavery in Brookline. It's the first introduction to slavery in our curriculum that students receive in Brookline, written by a team of 3 educators in Brookline, and one of whom received the Caverly Award this year. There has been some hesitation to teach it, some feeling of, well, what if it goes wrong? And so rather than sort of shy away from it, we are leaning in, and Jeff Tagnell in particular reaching out to support everyone in all of our schools, so that students across Brookline in 3rd grade have that experience. And then how do we expand that into other grades? Because this is happening at Devotion, but it's happening in Brookline. And I think that this is a really important learning opportunity for the entire town.
Are there any more questions or discussion?
Okay, so exactly where are we? We've had a motion and a second on the proposed interim name. On the question, all in favor? Any opposed? It is, I think we had 8 in favor, 1 opposed.
So now the motion is, does the school committee support the revised motion to be offered at town meeting?
As read by Ms. Ditkoff a short while ago.
Yes, it was on your...
Coolidge Corner School name inserted. Discussion on the motion. Or we need a motion. Second. Is there a second? Thank you, Ms. Federspiel. Discussion on the motion. On the question, all in favor, please indicate. Thank you. 8 in favor. Any opposed? Any abstentions? 1 abstention. 8-0 and 1. Okay, thank you very much.
All right, I need to go report this down to the advisory committee, who is going to now consider our motion. So
All right. Just having been reminded that the Hidden Brookline curriculum was written by educators, one of whom is receiving the Caverly Award this year. I want to remind us, because I neglected to point this out when we discussed the calendar, that the Caverly Awards will actually be awarded at the Brookline Education Foundation's Celebrating Teachers event next week at Newbury College at 3:30 p.m. on May 15th. It's a wonderful event. I've been many times, and I encourage everyone to join us there. Okay, next we have a proposed first reading of the Brookline policy on home instruction. And
ahead of schedule. So
oh, we're ahead of schedule.
Let me get her.
Okay.
Never happens.
Yeah,
I can be disciplined while she
There's
does it.
only 9.
Good job, really ahead of schedule. I'm sure we'll find a way to.
She was shocked we were 40 minutes ahead of schedule. Yeah, while
Ms.
we're,
Gittens gets ready.
sure, while we're waiting for Ms. Gittens, Mr. Bott. That's all right, you can still do it, I think.
So, we're just going to go out of order for a moment with the committee's consent. I want to update you on the process to solicit feedback for the proposed discipline policy, this initial draft of the discipline policy. I want to start by saying that Ms. Casey No Miller, who is 2 weeks or a week? A week and 2 days on the job as the interim deputy superintendent. Casey has taken on this policy, this draft policy, and both of us agree that there is the need for continued improvement to this starting point. And so I just want to reconfirm both a statement that came up at public comment, that came up among the committee at the last school committee meeting. This is really a starting point. Ms. No Miller and I have spent time both looking at the policy and discussing a process along with our union president to try and get more very specific and concrete feedback, not just sort of posting a typical policy. And I think that it's important to note that the process of posting policies and getting feedback is one that the committee has used for a long time, and yet there are certain policies where we need to put in significantly more effort in getting really high quality feedback. I mentioned, I think earlier, it's really important to poke holes in the policy because you see where the flaws are, and sort of in that process we will get a really strong policy. I will not put Ms. No Miller on the spot tonight, but I will a little bit. So if you have questions that you would like Ms. No Miller to answer, she can certainly come up to the podium. The plans for now are as follows. So first, at the back of your packet, you have the first 7 pages of the policy, and so that you can see the draft policy, the draft date is changed so that you can compare it to other versions that you've seen coming out of policy subcommittee. What you see in red on page 1, on page 4, and again on page 7 are some additions that, as the interim deputy superintendent, Ms. No Miller, believes, and I fully support, are important additions to the policy. Some of these, I won't read all of them, but I think I want to highlight that the first one is, to that end, we strongly believe in proactive practices with the aim of maximizing learning time in classroom for all students. We recognize and value the teacher's pivotal role in creating classroom environments that are conducive to engaged learning. And if you look at page 7, I'm not going to read the whole section in red, but 2 areas I want to highlight. The first is, we believe that student discipline practices work best when they are instructive, not punitive, and that the purpose of discipline must be to understand and address causes of behavior to resolve conflicts while teaching new skills and repairing the harm done in order to restore relationships. And I think that captures much better, and I'm not saying it is done, but captures much better the spirit that we all hold of the importance in restorative practice. And if you look at the bottom, I think that the policy, the initial draft was quite unclear on where there was autonomy, in particular for educators. And so this makes very clear that we believe that intervention is most effective when the educator working most directly with students intervenes in the way that they believe will most effectively support students. All level 1 and 2 interventions should be implemented by educators working most closely with students. While certain level 3 interventions require the intervention of the school principal, vice principal, associate dean, or dean, many level 3 interventions can and should be implemented at the discretion of the educator working most closely with the student. And that really came out of questions that were raised. It seemed in the initial draft that everything, including the smallest infraction, required the involvement of the principal. So as next steps, Ms. No Miller has been working on an overview PowerPoint for principals to share with staff at an upcoming faculty meeting. The purpose of the PowerPoint is capture the vision of of a discipline policy, to capture the vision that it is meant to be restorative. It is meant also to make clear. I mean, I think that there's something important in a policy like this in any district where it also makes clear it makes clear sort of where sort of the ranges of interventions are, but it also makes sure that there's not in excess because somebody judges too harshly an individual situation, right? I think that it's really important to make sure that while there's a lot of individual autonomy and discretion, you also don't want sort of a personal belief potentially to cloud the way or the level of intervention, which for certain behavior may not be inappropriate. And so I think it creates those, a good policy creates those gradients, creates those bands that provide clarity, which I think is really important. If you go back to the first paragraph, and I'm sorry I'm bouncing around a lot. The first paragraph said, we believe the students have the right to be treated fairly, courteously, and respectfully, to bring complaints to the school principal or staff for resolution, to tell their side of the story, and to freely express their opinions. And so when we are clear about the bands of sort of what happens, that, you know, if you are tapping your pencil on the behavior, that's not actually a level of behavior for disciplinary conduct. It might be like, hey, that's distracting, can you stop, right? But it provides our students, implemented well and with the proper type of training and information across the district, it provides not only our families, but provides our students with the knowledge of those bands. And so it becomes easier for students to advocate for themselves when they are treated more harshly or in a way that that is a result of some implicit or explicit bias. And so all of this, there's a lot of ideals that I just put forth, and that's why this policy, as I said earlier, will take some time. So Casey, Ms. No Miller is preparing that overview. Principals in an upcoming faculty meeting will share that with staff, and then put forth again both the full draft policy for comment and a link to a Google survey. And until the time when we have a policy chair, I will, because typically policy feedback goes to that chair. I'll have created a Google form link that will be made available to educators and to families. So principals will share that with educators for feedback, and we'll also proactively schedule meetings for feedback, focus group meetings with PSS, which is our student support, typically within special education. And all of our schools have PSS teams that meet weekly. That include special educators, team facilitators, school psychologists, guidance counselors, occupational therapists, speech pathologists, and anyone I'm forgetting, Ms. No Miller. And again, proactively with our child study teams at an upcoming child study team before the end of the year. And child study teams are our broader group, including general education teachers, specialists, interventionists, literacy specialists, math specialists, etc. So some more focused area for feedback. I also, after tonight, I wanted to update the committee on all of this. We'll prepare a message to be sent via Blackboard Connect. So again, not just posted in the way that policies typically are, but to send via Blackboard Connect. With the message more succinctly stated than I'm stating to you tonight for families on the purpose of the policy and the key questions. And Ms. No Miller, perhaps you would come up and share the 4 questions that will be included along with the opportunity to answer anything. And families, parents, and guardians will be asked to provide feedback or offered the opportunity through that same Google form. And I will bring all that feedback unfiltered to the policy subcommittee and to the full committee. And Ms. No Miller will use that feedback to continue to make improvements to the policy. It will likely take some additional vetting. And when we spoke about this, we spoke about this policy on Monday and again today. And I think that it would be, in many ways, irresponsible to say that it will be done by the end of June. And this is actually a policy where it's okay to take longer. It's a policy that is not something that is particularly difficult to implement mid-year. And so when we get to a point where we are comfortable recommending it to the committee for consideration, and then you get to the point where you're comfortable voting it, then we can plan the appropriate trainings for implementation. It's not a policy, for example, that would require the wholesale change of schedules, which is a policy that might have to wait until the summertime because schedules are so hard to change. So that is sort of what is set forth. And would you come up to the podium and share those questions that you shared with me earlier?
Andrew, if I could just ask while we're waiting. So when this is posted, you have the draft date, so people will always know what the latest is?
Yes.
And they can respond a number of times,
Yes.
right? Because
Absolutely.
we'll be updating it. Okay. We might make that clear to them as well, that will be updated. They should keep checking, and that we will take additional feedback.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, everyone, again. So these are the 4 questions that we hope to ask staff. The first one is, does the policy align with the approach and practices you implement in your classroom? What is missing here that's vital to include? What, if anything, requires additional clarification? And then what types of trainings for staff would be most valuable? And I gave some examples: discipline regulations, restorative justice, tiered intervention.
So my question, so these are for staff and employees. So do we have similar questions for parents or families?
Yeah, so we can generate ones that are similar to these.
Similar.
Yeah, they get at the same things, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And I think what's important is that these are guiding questions. These are not meant to be limiting. And so there's sort of this unspoken, I'll say it on the and recorded, so I guess it's not unspoken. They're guiding questions, but really answer whatever questions on your mind, right? Share whatever feedback is on your mind.
Well, there's
We
some
can make that
an
explicit.
open
Yeah.
comment section
Yeah.
or something, right?
Yeah, there should be.
It's not meant in any way, shape, or form to be limiting. It is, as we heard in public comment, as you're hearing from me now, and I think as you've heard from constituents, this is too important of a policy to have those sort of limiting comments. We really want, if we get overwhelming feedback that we need to start over, then we need to start over, right? This is about getting this right. It's not about we're this far down the road and we have to finish. And I think Casey and I are fully in agreement. And I think that this is going to be a really important process.
Well, I just want to say thank you very much for slowing this process down and including more stakeholders in the feedback. I think that was one of our concerns at the last meeting.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So you've heard us, and I thank you for that. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and if I can just add, I actually just sent Andrew an email. One thing to consider, and thank you for speaking earlier, is just should we think about also implicit bias training for our staff too? So just this is, we're constantly learning and taking feedback and incorporating it. Thanks.
Have we gotten feedback yet to date? We've gotten much. I mean, we had the speaker today. Thank you for that. But have we heard much? Have many things come in on the surveys today?
No. So nothing since the last meeting. I have not re-released the link.
Okay.
So Ms. Milstein will be starting this tomorrow with the early education staff. Most other schools would do it on May 22nd at the next faculty meeting. And so my apologies. It will be a rolling process. I don't remember when the high school is going to do it, but the deans both answered the when and how. I just don't remember offhand for how that will be shared. So I think it will be a process. And I think once it is put back out, we're going to start getting a lot more.
And will the staff have a chance to see this and read this before the May 22nd meeting?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I mean their staff meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll repost it and email it out in a similar way.
Okay. I mean, it's just
So everyone has
a
it.
pretty meaty.
It's long, yeah. It's actually 22 pages. I only because I printed it in color. And there weren't substantial changes.
It's something you really want to read,
Yeah.
and then you put down, and then you come back and read. I think, and you reread
Absolutely.
it again. There's a lot there. So
Yeah.
if they have time beforehand, I think that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
The BEEP staff won't have a ton of time, but they will have it for a longer period.
I have a question about something related to this in a funny way. I remember when I was teaching at Driscoll, one particular year there were several disciplinary issues that occurred, and that involved the principal and the vice principal, and some on the playground, etc. And the vice principal and the principal talked to the kids about it, and they looked into it and investigated it, and they decided what needed to be done as appropriate follow-up. The thing that they didn't do was come back and talk to the students in the class about what had happened, not what had happened and who had been punished and why they had been punished. But it turned out that the students thought nothing was being done because it was all very confidential about what was being done and who had done it. And so they were disturbed that that was happening. Now, this was, if I recall correctly, a 6th grade class. I'm not talking about a younger class. But I think that when there are discipline issues that have been observed by many, but behavior that has been observed by many people, or perhaps involves a number of people, it is important to make sure that the other students who are not involved understand that the issue has been resolved and taken care of. It's not that they're particularly interested in knowing what happened. What they're interested in is knowing that someone has responded to it and that the people who were involved in the issue had been spoken to, talked to, punished, whatever. Because if that doesn't happen, they can feel as if it's a little, they can become very unsure that it's a safe place. If the adults don't take care of the discipline issues, maybe I'm not in such a safe place. And I think just saying something about reporting back in certain instances that an issue has been resolved and taken care of is an important piece of the discipline policy, and I haven't seen it in here.
I would actually take it a step further, and I would say that an important step is for adults and students to come together, so to understand that their attention has been given. But I think that kids make mistakes. And I think that sometimes there are consequences, but I really believe that if there's a consequence, that's a private decision between the administrator or the teacher and the student. And what's important in the follow-up, so I agree that the follow-up is really important, but what's important in the follow-up is to reset that classroom community so that a student doesn't come back in and have other students make judgments about, well, that person did this, and so now we have to act this way. It's actually sort of, and it will take time. It's resetting. Or it's this goal of sort of this wholesale change of how we interact, right? So that it's so that you approach. So a student comes back into a classroom, and there's a resetting. It's like, okay, we are a community. Everyone is a member of the community, and okay, people make mistakes, and maybe it wasn't you today, but it'll be you one day, right? And how do we come back together and not judge, not hold, hold on to for forever that feeling. So yes, I think that interaction is really important, but I think it's a different type of interaction as opposed to saying that student was disciplined and I dealt with it. Like, I think that actually puts the student who was involved at a disadvantage in the long run.
Right, and I didn't really mean to imply that, but they need to know that the adults are there and will help them reset that kind of situation.
Agreed.
If nothing is said, then they think nothing has happened.
I fully agree.
Well, one thing as I was looking at this, that once we're done, because as people see things, more and more will be added, and I think it can get to a point where there's too much in the policy, and not too much, but too many pages, that it may need a good editor to go through it and try and, really distill it down to what the policy is, and then have guidelines afterwards, that would, flesh out more of the issues. But, I just think sometimes if you make a policy too long, it's not effective. It becomes difficult to understand. It becomes difficult to move through it. But, so just some editing, I think, would be helpful. And one other thing, are you going to, or have you actually discussed this, with the PTO presidents? Or that might be one venue to get parental feedback, as Ms. Gibbs was saying, or possibly for us to have a hearing, which may make sense, which we do on many of our policies, and allow parents to come and talk to us.
Yeah, it was distributed to PTO leaders to distribute. That was only one step, and I think a hearing makes good sense.
Great. And it probably, at this point in time, wouldn't happen until September.
Yeah.
All right, thanks for the update. We got in a lot deeper than just an update. That was good. More progress. Okay, we're on to the first reading of the proposed Public Schools of Brookline policy on home instruction. Deputy Superintendent Gibbs, thank you for joining us.
What am I doing?
I think perhaps an explanation of the process we went through, where we are today, and how we got here.
All right, awesome. Good evening, everyone. So the homeschool policy we started working on earlier this year, recognizing that we hadn't had an updated policy since 1991. And so our homeschool policy was not in step with state expectations. It was a little more intrusive than it had to be, and included that students could test and that they could receive diplomas if they were homeschooled. And so that's not actually currently true. So we went through and updated the policy. We also noticed that we did not necessarily have all students who were homeschooled in the district registered as homeschooled. So one of the things that the state requires is that we do keep track of all students between the ages of 6 and 16 to ensure that they are actually being educated. And if they are not, we have the responsibility as a district to communicate with the families and to potentially file truancy charges against families who are not keeping us apprised of what is happening with their students educationally. And so we did update the policy accordingly with more guidance and direction for families. In particular, we added the section to the application procedure, which points parents to the part on the website that explains to them where they need to register their students for school. Points out that they need to update us yearly on whether or not they plan to renew a homeschool policy, and that unless students meet requirements set by the district and the state, they are not eligible for diplomas. So any student who is homeschooled and decided they did want a diploma from Brookline, they would have to meet graduation requirements as set by BHS, as well as competency determination, which means they would have to pass the MCAS in order to receive a diploma from the district. And in 1991, there was no such thing as MCAS, so this policy did not include that, and now it does.
Dr. Gittens, just for everyone else's sake, can you explain what happens to a student who spends their entire academic career going through being homeschooled?
Being homeschooled. So students who are homeschooled every year have to submit, their families have to submit a plan that says this is what we cover. It ensures that they are getting between 900 hours to 990 hours of education, that certain topics are covered, what topics are covered. We do not have the authority to tell parents that they're doing this well or not. Parents are not required to have any particular licensure or qualification to homeschool their children. However, we do have to keep record, and they are required to send us their assessment of how their child is making progress according to their measures. Many students who are homeschooled participate in online opportunities. It really depends, is up to the families whether or not they, how it is that they engage in homeschooling. And then ultimately when students are done, for those students who intend to go on to college, they engage usually in what's called the HiSET exam, which is a test for homeschool students to show that they meet some minimum standard in order for them to be eligible to go to college, if that's what the family wants to see happen for their children. The other thing that we have seen is that parents, oftentimes there's communities of homeschool families, and so they may connect with other families to engage. Families have also they have the ability to reach out to the district to ask for resources and, to learn what the curriculum is here, and we often will point them to the website, maybe make connections with the Senior Director of Teaching and Learning or someone in my office to support families who do want to homeschool their kids.
And one thing that I think is interesting about this, clarification around part-time homeschooling.
Right. So one of the things that we have added to the policy is that it is an all-or-nothing opportunity. You either homeschool your child or you don't. And this does not mean, there are some families who engage in partial homeschooling because of health concerns or specific reasons, but it is not, a homeschool plan does not get to include, like, I will send my kid to school for this thing, but homeschool them for the rest, or I'll send them to school for the day, but homeschool them for certain subjects. This policy doesn't allow for that, and after getting input from principals as well as looking at what the law talks about, we feel confident in setting that line. We do offer students access to extracurricular activities in their neighborhood schools if there is space available. So in other words, if there's a team, let's say, at a school, if the team is filled by students who actually attend school full-time and there's not space for a kid that's homeschooled, then they won't have access to that. If there is space, they will have access. But the first come, first serve goes to students who actually engage in school full-time within the district.
Mr. Perlman. You can just leave it on the desk. You don't have to hold. Oh, you have to turn it on, yeah.
I have a couple questions. First, I noticed that in the 1991 version, the notification period is 6 weeks for the homeschool plan. The current version, I believe it says 14 days. Do you think that's going to be an adequate amount of time for the town to assess what?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been able to turn plans around really quickly. The busy time is the summertime, because that's usually when people start sending them in around July, somewhere between July and August. We, I think, might have added a deadline for July, but whenever a family decides to engage in homeschooling, they can say, like, tomorrow I want to start homeschooling my kid, and we oblige them of that. They need to give us a plan that will carry them through the rest of this year, and then start a fresh plan for the following year. But we feel like we can adequately turn things around in 14 days.
And the second question I have is, I see that there are certain requirements in terms of academic subjects to be covered. What I don't see, though, is anything about socialization. Is that something that is considered?
Honestly, not any of our business. As the district, what we can say is that as according to state law, you have to have 900 hours of instruction for elementary school, 990 for a year for high school, but we can't tell parents how to spend that time or the specific content. Like, they should cover English, social studies, math, science, but which areas they choose to focus on, we don't have any control over that, nor do we have any control over whether or not students are connected with other children or any of those things.
So any basic, yes, oh yes, Ms. Monopoly.
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I understand clearly. Could you just restate for me about the question about the application period? So if a family decided after July 1st, that's for re-enrollment in a homeschool program. If a family moved in, in September and decided that they wanted to homeschool, do they have to send their child to school for that 14 days until their application is approved, their program is approved? Or could you just clarify that for me so I understand?
Actually, no. That was in the previous policy, that families had to send their kids to school first and wait for approval. That was one of the, it might be, there were a few laws that kind of cases that set precedents, and it might be the Brunel versus Lynn Public Schools, where they wanted the family to send their kid to school until their plan was approved, and the judge says we can't make families do that. We need to turn plans around quickly enough so that they can actually keep their kids home. What we do want all families to do, and we are following up with folks who haven't done this, is make sure that they're registered with the district so that we can keep track of who we're supposed to receive plans from. But we cannot make families send their kids to school until their plans are approved.
Thank you.
No problem.
So along the lines of the discussion we just had about the outreach for community input and everything else, other kinds of process on the discipline policy, is there any plans along those same lines for the homeschooling policy?
The homeschool policy is pretty much guided by state law in previous court cases. So, I mean, there are some things that I would love to put in the homeschool policy that we can't. Like, I'd like to see the kids, that they're actually thriving and alive, and, like that kind of thing. But we don't have the right, so there's not really much community input put to gather. I don't even know, I really don't even know what community input we would gather on this, because it is along state lines.
Whatever community input there is, we certainly welcome, and we wholeheartedly encourage folks to submit that. It can be addressed at our next policy subcommittee as well, if folks want to attend that, which is June. No, not June. When is it?
June 6th.
June 6th. Thank you.
I was just going to mention, I think we did talk at one of the policy subcommittee meetings about the possibility of reaching out to some of the homeschool networks that we have in the community and engaging, specifically sending it to them. I don't know if do we have information on what those organizations are?
We don't. We only know the families who report, like, even if a family moved into the district today and we didn't know they were here, there's no way to even know if they're homeschooling their kids. So we don't have access to homeschool networks. We know that families engage in them, but there's not like a
PTO.
no, not that I know of. There could be, I don't know.
Along to your point, Mr. Glover, it doesn't cost us any postage to send an e-blast. So we can, all school committee policies are posted on the district website, and all school committee policies have a link, an email address for feedback, and so we can do the same thing and send an e-blast out that says this policy is in its draft form, has been up for its first read, and it is up for public comment, and we can do that easily. So I would wholeheartedly embrace that. Thank you.
So I just have a question, and I'm not sure if it comes under home schooling policy, but in some communities, not in Brookline, I believe, but in some communities, high schoolers are now taking courses off campus. They'll go to the community college, they'll go to a local college. Do we do that? So that's not considered homeschooling, right? Okay, thank you.
Typically set up in districts as dual enrollment.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next agenda item is school choice non-participation proposed vote. Okay. Ms. Dunn, is that up to you? What? You have it. I have it. As I said in my earlier remarks, Ms. Coyne is invaluable in keeping us on track and making sure that I can successfully do my job at least. So the school choice law contained in the Education Reform Act of 1993 presumes that each school committee will admit non-resident students under the school choice program unless there is a vote to the contrary taken by June 1st of each year, following a hearing on the issue. The Brookline School Committee combined the hearing for this issue with the public hearing on the fiscal year 2019 budget held on February 15th, 2018. So we have already held our hearing on school choice. The school choice reimbursement rate is substantially less than the cost of educating one of our students. And, as we all know, we have no excess capacity in our buildings. And for these reasons, I move not to participate in the school choice program for the 2018-2019 school year.
I second it.
Thank you, Ms. Charlepsky. Is there any discussion on this motion? Everybody clear? Okay. Thank you very much. On the question, all in favor? You don't have, you can?
I just feel like I don't know enough information.
Perfect. You should abstain. Exactly. So we have 8 in favor. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. We have 1 abstention. And Mr. Perlman, it seems like you've been doing your homework and you're up to speed on every issue. But if you aren't, you certainly it is common practice for recently elected school committee members to abstain from issues that they just don't feel like they want to record one way or another, and that they haven't. And you're also welcome to ask questions and slow the discussion down a little and find out what school choice is all about. But essentially, if we were to allow it, then we have to take tuition applications from other communities. And right now it's not really, we've got other discussions about non-resident students that we highly value having in our schools, or some of us do. All right. Mr. Superintendent.
Thank you. This is a long report similar to the last long one, but that one was at 11 at night. So just want to note that Yeah. So first, again, I want to congratulate Barbara Scotto on her re-election to the school committee, and welcome our new members, Jennifer Monopoly and David Perlman. I personally look forward to working with all three of you in the years to come, and the full committee, right? And it's not at the exclusion of everyone else on the committee. Since our last meeting, I've been able to spend quite a bit of time at Lower Devotion, Baker School, and Lincoln. And just as a reminder, the visits every week are a permanent fixture in my weekly calendar, allow me to be in classrooms, spend time with educators and students, and support principals in their work. I don't think I've ever publicly thanked Mrs. Betsy Fitzpatrick for making sure that I am able to stick with this calendar. Ms. Fitzpatrick and I set this calendar in September, and it is through her diligence of keeping me on point that I'm able to continue spending a great deal of time in schools. I want to take a bit of time just to share a few big ideas through the superintendent report with the school committee. The first is about restorative justice. And throughout the FY19 budget development process and in the passing of the FY19 budget, the district committed resources over the next 3 fiscal years to support the integration of restorative justice practices in our school. And I'm going to sort of pause for one moment and say that I think that restorative practice, I'm going to be pretty audacious here, is a way that we can actually change the way that we interact, all people interact, sort of flipping the way that we approach interactions so that they are ones based on respect and positive relationships, and that we restore those relationships when they are somehow harmed. So the Suffolk University Center for Restorative Justice, their website describes the restorative practices as follows. Restorative justice is a value-based approach to conflict and harm. These values are often identified as inclusion, democracy, responsibility, reparation, safety, healing, and reintegration. But one value is more essential than any other: respect. For victims, restorative responses empower victims by offering them a voice in the process, an opportunity to ask questions and seek answers, afford them a role in decision-making, and avenues for healing, restitution, and emotional support. For wrongdoers, restorative responses enable wrongdoers to be accountable for their conduct, affords opportunities to make amends and express remorse, offers constructive ways to repair harm, supports making responsible choices, creates forums for forgiveness, reconciliation, and reintegration. And for communities, restorative responses reinvest citizens with the power to contribute meaningfully to the resolution of community problems, allows citizens to articulate and affirm moral standards of the community, provides a forum for addressing the underlying conditions which generate harm, and contributes toward the building of safe, thriving, and peaceful communities. The values at the core of restorative justice practices go even deeper. We aim for these values to be an embedded part of our school-wide culture. When implemented properly, restorative practices become the basis for how we interact with each other. Restorative practices are not only the steps taken after the fact when a transgression has occurred, but they are also about fostering healthy relationships, strengthening relationships between individuals, and reinforcing social connections within communities. The integration of restorative justice into our schools is critical if we are to successfully live the mission and vision of the public schools of Brookline. Its use in our schools and across our community is equally important if we are to achieve the district's 4 goals. Speaking personally, the most powerful experience I have had as an educator was my participation in a restorative circle with students, families, and educators following the racist videos that surfaced among high school students before the Thanksgiving holiday. The inherent respect and meaningful resolution that's achieved through the restorative process is incredibly important, and these underlying values should be held and taught by all members of our community. There are many people, educators, parents, students, and citizens who share the common vision of weaving restorative practice into the fabric of our schools, and I would add our community. Dr. Maria Litas, the Director of Guidance and Clinical Services, and Gabriel McCormick, our Director of Professional Development, are leading the beginnings of this work for the district. They've reached out to Suffolk University and other restorative justice partners to understand both the capacity to train PSB educators as well as their interest in partnering with us in this important work. In the coming weeks, Dr. Litas and Mr. McCormick will begin working closely with educators, clinician, the Brookline Educators Union, town departments, most notably the Office of Diversity Inclusion, and Mr. Gelano, to begin developing a 3-year plan that would bring restorative practices across and through our schools, with the goal of starting implementation of the initial steps this coming September. This is not a plan. A great deal of work needs to go into the creation of a plan that is one that is embraced and is inclusive of our entire community. So this is really for you the vision of what these dollars will begin to support. And I want to add that the Brookline Education Foundation has spoken with their funding in support of the importance of restorative practice and has in their grants granted the district additional dollars above the $65,000 that the school committee voted to support restorative work. So if you really think about the process, this is if the goal is the implementation of restorative practice, the first step is community-based conversations and community-based goal development. And so that would be the first step happening that brings in everyone that I mentioned and more so that the development of this process is incredibly inclusive. So I look forward to updating the committee on how this is happening and what is developed incrementally as we go. But I deeply believe in the importance, like this is a peg that as a town we need to hang our hats on. This is something that's incredibly important. And I think that when done right in the schools, we can actually change the conversation in town because we will have children. We've seen the power of youth this year in particular across our nation. And I think this is an incredibly pivotal moment for us empowering our students. And so I believe that this is one of those pegs we hang our hats on. And I also deeply believe that the creation of the plan and the process has to be one that is organic and very inclusive. And so that process will be beginning. But given it's how much it was discussed in the budget development process, and given the votes, the successful override vote this week, I wanted to share with the committee what has initially started to take place with restorative practice. So a lot more to come on that.
So I think we could just pause there because
sure.
I want to say I'll just say I've been really excited about the move to restorative practice as a way of addressing these deep challenges, and that you brought back to the committee as happening at the high school early in the year, and it is really exciting to see it moving forward. But I just wanted to open it up to the committee because that was I thought it was a really exciting report. And if anybody has any comments or questions, just before you move on, Ms. Fettersby.
So I am really excited about this work, and I don't want to slow you down or hold you back. However, it's a big job. And I do believe that some teachers and the officers of the union have also gone through some training. And so let's make sure that we include everybody in the plan, because some work has already been done. You mentioned Suffolk University, but I believe they've also done some work.
I believe it says and others. I believe it's Northeastern is the other.
Well, I think they actually went down to New York, but
we've spoken.
Yeah, they can tell you that better. But I just want to make sure that we include all of them, because this is actually a wonderful opportunity as well to develop teacher leadership. Right, and to be leaders in that, if they're willing. I mean, I don't know, but I would want to have them included at all levels. But so thank you for spearheading this work.
I, too, am very excited about it. I think one of the things that we heard from the community in the override process was what a priority this was to get right. and not just to be responsive to events that happen, but to create a climate and culture that was fully inclusive, and also set a baseline for when incidents did occur, that people could sort of have a touchstone to respond to those incidents appropriately, so that it wasn't just one-off, because there was sort of a notion that sometimes that even the discipline policy that ends up looking very punitive because it's a policy, that what's the positive cultural work that we're doing, and the anti-bias work that we're doing that precedes all of that, and kind of addresses some of the root causes of discipline issues. Not all of them, obviously, but some of them. So I'm just excited that this is a positive, important approach to equity that we're investing in, and I'm very pleased that that the town's supportive of it, and not just in the vote, but also in many, many evenings spent with residents and families on this issue. So thank you for doing this, and thank you to all the staff who are going to be working on it as well.
So, I'm sorry.
So I just thought of one other thing that we haven't talked about much, either in restorative justice or in the discipline policy, and that is a trauma-safe school, or a school that is really in tune with trauma that children may bring to school with them. And so I don't know where to put that, that thought about trauma and how that impacts children, but it feels like it's a part of all of this, right? That's related to the policy or on discipline and restorative justice. And so maybe we could give some thought to that as well.
That's a great question. Thank you. So the second update that is directly linked to the budget that the school committee approved pertains to the $100,000 that was included for response to intervention. And as you remember, at various school committee meetings, at my select board presentation, and at the town advisory committee's review of the budget, what I put forth for these dollars was a vision that these funds support paying educators to be a part of instructional leadership teams. And I want to take a moment to say that it is not without precedent. We have several years ago, and I mentioned using the child study teams as a structure for supporting students who are struggling. Instructional leadership teams are things that are an organizational structure that districts who use them effectively and have been using them for a long time. And when used effectively, they decentralize instructional decision making to the school. They provide for innovation. They provide for really the uplifting and celebration of diverse ideas of educators in a school to make instructional decisions, to try things that make safe innovation. When the goal that we are all trying to achieve, we all have a common goal. It's the mission, vision, and goals set forth by the school committee. But the pathway there, in so many respects, will vary depending on the individual students in our schools and some of the differences between our schools. And so I believe deeply that instructional leadership teams, if done right, are a powerful way for us as a district to really sort of localize instructional decision making at the school level. There's a lot of work to do around the launch of instructional leadership teams. I spoke off the cuff there from the heart. I want to go back to the text. I'm going to jump in midway through that first paragraph, which is, while schools continue working toward the same district goals, the ways students are supported and the path taken towards achieving those goals are set by school-based teams. Instructional leadership teams are a powerful way to embrace and support educational innovation, innovation that is an important part of the fabric of our schools in Brookline. Schools use their instructional leadership team as shared decision-making structure to ensure that staff are involved in developing and leading the instructional priorities and decisions of schools. Instructional leadership teams allow for site-based, educator-led decision-making and empower educators to work with the principal to make instructional decisions that best serve students. Ben Lummis has, for the district, since the inclusion of this idea in the budget, has been working with principals, with the Office of Teaching and Learning, and the Office of Student Services to develop a draft as a starting point for discussions around instructional leadership teams. What I want to point out is that in that initial work, those various departments that I described through my entry year as very siloed really came together and are intertwining. I shared a draft earlier today with the union president, with Jessica Wender-Shubo, and Ben is going to work closely, I think, beginning next week to understand questions, concerns, ideas. And I said beginning next week, but not exclusively next week and forward, so that the important perspective, voice, and feedback can all be brought into the development of the plan. And I do anticipate that we will be able to launch these school-based leadership teams in the coming fall. And so I will keep you updated on those, on that important work as well. I do deeply believe, again, when done right, and there are districts that use them wrong. There are districts that use them at times to say that it is a vehicle for school-based decision making, but it's really not. And I've seen them done well, and I deeply, deeply believe that that's not only what we will get, but what we will get very quickly. And I think that's a really important step for our community, most notably because there's so much innovation. And if you think about sort of the thread of superintendent reports, where I often highlight what I see happening in schools, so much of it is innovation. And I think, how do we capture and embrace that innovation as a means to push forward the learning of all of our students. So much more to come on that as it's developed. Again, I'm not sharing a draft because it's just that, it's a draft, and it requires a lot of work at this point before it's ready for that next phase, but much more to come. Oh, sorry.
Can we comment?
Sure.
So I am a big believer in instructional leadership teams. It's a wonderful opportunity for shared decision making. I had some great success with that in my schools. It does take additional time on the teacher's part, and so it wasn't, at my school we didn't have it during the day. We had it be either before or after school, and it required additional hours. So we actually, I believe, had stipends, and so I'm just asking you to consider that, or figure out how that happens in a teacher's day or a teacher's schedule. I want
to say that $100,000 that is in the budget is for exactly that.
Thank you.
The
thing that's confusing me, Andrew, is I don't think of response to intervention as the same thing as instructional leadership team. So that's confusing me. Am I confused, or?
No, I think that's a fair.
Okay.
That's a fair.
Okay, so you're taking the money from. I'm not trying to get us in trouble. I'm just trying to.
So no, it's not taking it from response to intervention. It was, I think, calling it in the budget response to intervention, but always describing it as a means to have instructional decision making, where you can have instructional responses based on the needs that educators see in a school. That is really at it's seeing that as at its core a tier 1 response to intervention. Like, how do we need to change on the path that we're on? Or the path that we want to be on, as opposed to the tier 2 or tier 3 response to intervention. So it is a fair point that it requires some greater clarity. But this is it's as intended, and this $100,000 is intended to pay people, pay educators for their time to be a part of these leadership teams.
Thank you, Andrew, for the clarification.
And now some celebrations. Brookline High School's social emotional support is going to be highlighted on an NBC 10 documentary on adolescent anxiety. Brookline High School's work supporting the emotional health of our students will be highlighted next week on NBC 10's documentary on adolescent anxiety. NBC 10 has started producing 30-minute documentaries on health and wellness issues of interest to local viewers. The producer reached out to us to see if she could include BHS in the report to show how a school works with its students. Ben Lummis worked with Anthony Meyer to coordinate the effort. BHS social worker Fran Kuhn, school psychologist Matt Dubois, and BHS senior Rebecca Shine were all interviewed on camera. Mr. Kuhn talked about the history and diversity of our many support programs that are designed to build coping skills and resilience in our students, and highlighted the work that BHS has been doing on mindfulness. Mr. Dubois described the counseling and intervention services we provide, and Rebecca described how the skills she has learned and the support she has received from high school staff have helped her to manage the stress and anxiety of high school. Thank you to Fran, Matt, and Rebecca for representing the high school so well and speaking so openly and honestly about such an important topic. The documentary will air on NBC 10 May 23rd at 7:30 p.m., on NECN on May 24th at 8 p.m., and on Telemundo Boston on June 3rd at 6 o'clock p.m.
On Telemundo, it'll be translated into Spanish?
I believe so.
Great.
I will confirm that, but I believe so. Last night was the annual Steps to Success, Inc. Gala held at the Clay Observatory at Dexter Southfield. School committee members Helen Charlevsky, Michael Glover, and Barbara Scotto all were in attendance at this wonderful celebration. This is the signature fundraising event for Steps to Success Incorporated, and also serves to showcase the accomplishments of our students served in the program. It was a fantastic evening. The night's honoree was Jim Fitzgibbons, who has served as a member of the Development Committee for 12 years. From hosting meetings around his dining room table to chairing the signature gala, Jim's support has been integral to the success of the STEPS organization. Despite a late night last night, Steps to Success joined us early this morning at my monthly parent leader and a meeting of PTO and school council co-chairs. Jeanette Lindor, the Brookline Public Schools Steps to Success coordinator, and Shoma Hawk, the Steps to Success Incorporated executive director, talked with parents about the three-way partnership between Brookline, the Public Schools of Brookline, the Brookline Housing Authority, and Steps to Success Incorporated. I will note for the committee that all three organizations combined what you allocate as a school committee to support our Steps to Success students, what Steps to Success Incorporated is able to fundraise, and the dollars that the Brookline Housing Authority are able to allocate in support of Steps to Success students is nearly $1.5 million yearly. And I just wanted to note that as an incredible investment on the part of the town in incredible youth. And so just it's not often that we think about sort of the totality of what the three organizations do. Ms. Lindor and Ms. Hawk made very clear what the PSB does during the school day, what Steps to Success Inc. does nights, weekends, vacations, summer, and how the Brookline Housing Authority supports families. Their presentation focused on the many ways that our students are supported in these holistic programs, and as I said, during school vacation weeks. At the back, I shared with you a copy of the presentation that they shared this morning. Yet another celebration and an invitation to the school committee. You may recall that in my March 22nd report, I shared news that 3 Brookline High School students had received 3rd prize in the C-SPAN Annual National Video Documentary Contest. The competition called for students to submit a short documentary about a provision in the U.S. Constitution and its importance to them. Our students, Chloe Janes, Brian Zhu, and Romy Meehan, submitted an entry titled Under Siege, the Assault on the American Press, that highlighted the First Amendment freedom of the press. The competition received a record 2,985 video submissions from over 5,700 students in 46 states, so this 3rd place prize is quite an honor. Officials from C-SPAN will be at Brookline High School for a small ceremony Tuesday, May 15th at 8:40 a.m. to present the students with their prize. C-SPAN has invited school committee members to attend, so please let Betsy Fitzpatrick know if you'll be able to attend, and she will RSVP for you. Mr. Pollack has already agreed to attend. As you will be reminded later in the superintendent report, I will be in Xi'an, China on Tuesday, May 15th, so I will not be able to attend this meeting. And if you haven't seen the video for our students' production, the link is here at the bottom of the page. Ms. Charlevsky and I on Monday had the pleasure and honor of being able to attend a meeting with our BEEP principal, Vicki Milstein, along with CBT architects to review the current plans for the early childhood building being built for the town of Brookline at 131 Harvard Street. As a reminder to everyone, the building will be leased to the town of Brookline for $1 for 20 years, $1 a year for 20 years, thanks to the generosity of Laura Trust and Alan Lichman. The land acquisition, development cost, and complete furnishings will total approximately $10 million, all privately paid for by Ms. Trust and Mr. Lichman. I will add, actually, not in the report, is that in order for the donors to receive their building permit, likely in August, the school committee, the building commission, put a provision in the issuance of the building permits that the school committee approve the lease or recommend the approval of the lease to the, I believe, the building department, if I'm remembering correctly.
We have to have a signed lease.
A signed lease. In approximately a week, the hope is that in approximately 1 week, we will have a copy of the lease for your review that we will docket both at Capital Subcommittee meeting and at a full school committee meeting. Ms. Coyne has actually put on the screen for you a picture of the proposed building. If I could point out to you, this is the Harvard Street side, and at the lower end, you can actually see an entryway that is a U around the building for parent drop-off, for car drop-off, which would be at the back of the building. The next 3 floors, which are the second, third, and fourth floor, you can see the large windows at either corner, and what you can't see at the back of the building is another set of large windows. Those are 3 classrooms per floor, 3 large early childhood classrooms per floor, with plenty of window space, sinks, developmentally appropriate bathrooms, sight lines through the whole room, just a remarkable, deeply large classroom spaces. Also included, if you sort of look along the piano store side of the building, which is the side to the right of the screen, you see a lot of smaller windows. Those are spaces for speech and occupational therapy. They are dedicated teacher workspace, conference space for educators and families to meet, for educators to meet. On the Stop and Shop side of the building, there is a kitchen for students to use. I'm not sure if there's another picture.
There's another view.
And similar to the high school design, what's really remarkable, what CBT captured in their design, is what Ron Associates captured in their design with havens and spaces in the middle of the building for students and adults and families to sort of all come together and congregate, whether it's the kitchen space or it's physical activity space. There's this incredible alignment in vision and programming between what will soon be an early childhood center for the town of Brookline and what will also soon be an expanded Brookline High School. On the 5th floor of the building, so on the 4th floor, there's an inside indoor gym. It has another name in it, which I included, a sensory gym for students with special needs and for therapies. It also, on rainy days, could be used as an indoor physical activity space. I believe the sensory gym is larger than some of the multi-purpose rooms in our K-8 schools, if the square footage of those spaces, which is burned into my memory, is, if I'm recalling accurately. The 5th floor, which is open, has a maker space on the inside, a large maker space for really messy, fun, early childhood activities where actually it's large enough for 2 classes to come together. And then has an outdoor play space, which has a track for tricycles. It has a water feature, and it has a climbing structure, which you can't see on the back side of it, not near the edge of the glass. The glass in this rendering is 7 feet high. There's draining throughout. There are no seams on it. I'm sorry, it's 8 feet high, I believe, Mr. Arlepsky?
7 feet from the wall. I don't know if the wall
It's
is
7 feet
raised.
from, that's correct. It's 7 feet from the wall, and the wall is off the ground.
Right.
We'll get the proposed specs from the architects and share with the committee. They're also going to heat the floor so that in a snowstorm there would be snow removal, but it would also melt the snow so you don't have snow drifts piling up potentially near the glass. Ms. Charlevsky and I spent a lot of time discussing those walls, how high they should be. Is there a need for netting? Ms. Charlevsky and I both believe that on the Harvard Street side, there is need for netting, if for no other reason, to keep drivers safe from balls that may fly over the building. We wouldn't want somebody driving down the street to be surprised unexpectedly with a basketball hitting their windshield. And then the top floor is office space. It is parent meeting space. It's professional development space. There's a large meeting room where the entirety of the BEEP teachers from across the district can meet for meetings and professional development. So I'm varying very much from the text of my report, but I would see if Ms. Charlevsky has anything to add. I will say that the architects CBT will be meeting beginning next week with the fire department, the police department, Charlie Simmons, and Kevin Stokes to make sure that they are accounting for the needs of all of those departments. So Kevin Stokes, in terms of security, what he needs in terms of wiring to have key card entry, and wireless internet access. They want to make sure they're not going to install the server. That will be our responsibility, but they want to make sure that all of the guts of the building are properly wired. Similarly, they want to make sure that the egress, the location of the enunciator, the access around the building meets what the fire department expects. And that from Charlie's perspective, all the building systems are building systems that he will be able to manage, because the lease, while it's $1 a year, the building department will assume the operating costs of this building.
And that means we assume the operating
Yes.
costs of the building. I think I just want to reiterate what you said. This is a wonderful space, and it finally gives BEEP a well-deserved home, so they're not moving around, migrants around to different buildings, different spaces. They can be in one space. It's a welcoming space for parents to come into. There'll be parking for all strollers there to keep there while after they drop off their kids and go off to work or wherever they're going, and can use the strollers to come back. I think almost everything one could think of is in this building, and it's really been extremely well thought out. The other piece is this will be not all provided by Brookline Public Schools, but this will be a full year, full day facility where parents can have their children there all the time. The Brookline Public Schools will be running the preschool time, and there will be a coordination to have a full day, extended day, and a full year too. So the building will be well used by the BEEP community and possibly by others of us who want to use the space. But it's truly a amazing gift, and
we'll have 6 classrooms, space for a RISE classroom, possibly 2, depending on enrollment in the RISE classes, as well as the sensory gym. So it's not 6 classrooms plus a RISE programmatic area at the expense of the sensory gym. So it would be larger than any of our currently leased sites, Putterham, Temple Obey Shalom, and then the town-owned site at Lynch. If the building permit is issued in August or September, it is possible that construction will start before the winter, which means that sometime during the 1920 school year, earlier in the 1920 school year, the building would be finished. It's anticipated that the building permit is delayed and issued closer to the winter. Construction would start after the winter. So we anticipate that occupancy in this building would be starting in September of 2020. And so we have approached, Ms. Charlevsky and I have had a meeting with and now need to follow up with the presidents of Temple Obey Shalom because the current lease expires at the end of the 18-19 school year. So we need to, we have requested a 1-year extension of the lease, which the presidents have been amenable to. We requested it at the same terms as the current lease, which they also, at least initially, indicated being amenable to. And so we will continue that because the timing just isn't it doesn't sync up perfectly with the timing of the expiration of our leases.
And their estimation is that in the best case scenario, they wouldn't be ready till January of 2020. And we might be able to start moving some offices in there, but certainly not kids at that point in time, because we have to have a place for them beginning in September, so that's going to be rented out. There's one other thing I was going to mention that you were saying.
I had a question. Sure. So it looks beautiful. It's quite vertical. So are the children going up and down stairs all day?
So actually, it has 2 elevators.
Okay, so they'll put a class in an elevator? Well, I'm just curious how that's going to work.
So if you think about that's a great question. So typically, there's no more than 15 students in an early childhood class, sometimes 16, with 2 to 3 adults. So you actually can split classes between the elevators. A building this size would typically have 1 elevator, but the donors and the architects believed that having the second elevator and using the square footage for that elevator and the additional cost was well worth it for the movement of students. There's also 2 large staircases that have open windows, so you're not bound to use the elevator. So if you're on the 4th floor classroom and you're going to go up to the gym, you can walk up the staircase, and the staircases are actually on either side. One staircase is on the Stop and Shop side, and one is on the piano store side near the elevators. If I'm remembering correctly, there are also student bathrooms between the classrooms and adult bathrooms on every floor. I mentioned the kitchen for students to do project-based learning, but there's also a servery where meals can be properly sort of stored and prepared, or snacks, meeting early childhood guidelines, state guidelines for sort of food preparation, so that can also be provided.
And if I can just say one more thing. So the other piece, what I was thinking about before, is that this is wonderful and fantastic, but our goal is still to have preschool classrooms, 2 to each building, when we have space. So just to keep that in mind.
There was a mention of a sensory gym, which I find very exciting, especially for our special needs students. And Ms. Charlevsky, you touched upon this earlier about possible use of this facility for non-BEEP students. Is that something that...
I wasn't talking about students, actually. I was talking
for others in the
about
community.
Adult meetings or something like that.
So my question specific to the sensory gym, do you think that could possibly be available to other special needs students?
In Brookline?
Right.
I don't see why not. I mean, I think that there's a the rental policy that the school committee has, and for other nonprofits in town. I mean, it's a very affordable rental rate, and I think managing just when folks are using the space, I don't see why not. And we would just have to coordinate it well with the school day operations and the extended day operations.
I don't think there would be a lot of daytime times available in thinking it through, because you have the 6 classes that are there that would be using it either as a sensory gym or as a regular gym. So either way, there would be use of those spaces. And the students in our programs who are in other schools who need a sensory gym have that available to them.
But early education principal Vicki Milstein, once she gets her new palace, we'll figure out how best how to schedule it.
There are weekend opportunities. I mean, it's in use full year, but it's a Zoom.
Yes, and all of our buildings, we rent spaces when we're not using them. That's true for all of them. We have a rental policy, and we have a cost per space. We haven't figured out the cost per space for this yet, but.
Well, I think that's going to be a key piece of the lease agreement is if we the town are paying the cost of operating the building, who receives rental payments, and I would believe that it would be the town, as Ms. Dickoff already indicated. But we want to make sure that that's all played out in the agreement. But as has been said, I don't imagine different than any other building. Opening up access to a great facility. All right. I already spoke at length about devotion. Just want to reconfirm for the committee, Tuesday, May 22nd at 3:30 p.m. All educators will be touring the building. I did the committee requested quite some time ago to reach out to families in buffer zones in terms of the enrollment of devotion. I have done that. I've reached out and offered the opportunity to families in buffer zones to opt, not mandatory at all, but to opt into transferring to devotion. We've received a handful, around a little less than I sort of anticipated. I did not anticipate a large number, but so we'll be answering those the week before Memorial Day. I will say that through use of the buffer zones I shared with the Capital Subcommittee, through the effective use of buffer zones, the kindergarten enrollment, which is the one that we're working on so far, devotion is 85% enrolled, which at this point in the year means by the end of the summer it will be 100% enrolled. So we've used buffer zones really well, which has created space and flexibility at Driscoll, at Lawrence, and at Pierce. And so we are at least initially seeing the possibility of providing some relief, sort of wrapping its way to Pierce with the capacity at Driscoll School without going over the school committee guidelines for enrollment. So we're keeping it at the typical number. We are not enrolling 25 students in kindergarten, but keeping it at 21 students. So 21 to 22, the school committee guideline being 22. I'm sorry? Maximum. Yeah, right. That's why I said 21, but I just wanted to be clear that your guideline is 22, but I am working on the assumption of 21 with the buffer assignments. I will update you more. We get a lot of assignments to Pierce, and so there's sort of some interesting things happening at Pierce right now with enrollment, but it is way too early to say anything definitive. Pierce we see a lot of enrollment over the summer at Driscoll, Runkle Driscoll, Devotion, Lawrence, and Pierce, but Pierce in particular is a school that we see historically a real surge, sort of a late surge in June, July, and August. So I'm going to hold back because to say anything now about where numbers are at Pierce in particular, it's just not. It will be inaccurate shortly as that surge begins. And lastly, I want to share with the committee that an update on the Brookline Xi'an China Exchange Program, the CHEX program. In 1999, the district established a student exchange partnership with the Gaoshan No. 1 High School in Xi'an, China. Since then, the program has flourished. Each year, a group of students from Gaoshan No. 1 High School spend the fall semester at Brookline High School, and we complete the exchange in the spring by sending 8 students and 1 teacher to Xi'an. CHEX is led by a steering committee and coordinated by Brookline High School teacher Steve Lantos. A delegation from Xi'an last visited Brookline in October 2016, and I believe 2 years before that, so 2014 and 2016. This year, we are honored to be reciprocating by sending a 7-member delegation to Xi'an next week. Joining me for a week in China will be school committee members Susan Wolf-Ditkoff and Barbara Scotto, Deputy Superintendent Nicole Gittens, Brookline High School Headmaster Anthony Meyer, CHEX Coordinator Steve Lantos, and the chair of the CHEX Steering Committee, Karen Wang, who also is a Driscoll School parent. Karen is a tireless advocate and booster of the program, and we thank her for all of her efforts in organizing this trip. We do have a full itinerary, and I look forward to sharing the highlights of the trip at the next school committee meeting. I will add that there are a couple of goals that we are going with that our partners in Xi'an are also interested in discussing, including the possibility of a shorter exchange for younger students, possibly for middle school students. So we'll be visiting a middle school, and so that's a possibility that we will be discussing. At the university to talk about the possibility of educator exchanges between Brookline and Xi'an. So, so some exciting things happening next week. And thank you. And someone will need to hold me up at town meeting, because we fly back right before town meeting. Not included in the superintendent report, but I just want to update the committee. Ms. Charlevsky and I have, for a year, off and on, been working with folks at the high school, Gary Schiffman and Jen Martin. Jen Martin, a social studies history teacher, and Gary Schiffman, the chair of the department, to really understand how we can successfully and responsibly teach about the modern-day Arab-Israeli history in our 10th grade history class. And so we had a wonderful meeting, and do it in an unbiased way, and do it successfully in a way that is embraced broadly in our community and beyond. I'm really excited about this. It's something that has not gone well in some districts. Yet I believe it's something that is really important for us to figure out. And in Jen Martin and in Gary Schiffman, we have two educators who are deeply committed to figuring out how to do this and want to be leaders in this work. So about 2 weeks ago, we met with Dr. Rachel Fish, who works at Brandeis. She is the assistant director. I just want to get her title right. The Associate Director of the Schusterman Center for Israeli Studies. And Dr. Fish and the Schusterman Center are willing to partner with us as real partners with the Brookline High School History Department to figure out how, not only what the content is that we should teach, and actually support educators in really educators deciding what is the content we should teach in the Schusterman Center, and supporting us in the how. And so this is something that, again, that is really important to the history department at the high school. And in my listening to their perspective and their vision, it is something that is really important to me. So we're going to continue going down this path and further explore. And I think we have a great partner in Brandeis. There's a lot of excitement.
Yes. No, if I could just put in a few words, I was very skeptical about doing this, especially since all of the newspaper articles about Newton and what went on there. It gave me great pause. I am this has been a process that's taken some time to get to this place, but I was very impressed with Dr. Fish, I think it is, and the way that she approached it. And the thing that I remember the most from what she said was, you know, we want kids to come out of this course saying, you know, I had thought one way, and now I'm not so sure. That, you know, to be able to see all sides of a conflict and really understand that nothing is simple. You know, and that if you make it simple, you're not understanding it. So to me, that framework of thinking of it in that way is what I want kids to do. I want them to think. I want them to read primary sources. I want them to understand not propaganda, but history and what happened in history. So.
And I'll add as sort of the end of the superintendent, this very long superintendent report, that Jen Martin actually piloted this after doing training with Brandeis and used this book, Essential Israel Essays for the 21st Century, as anchor text. And again, it's not about trying to come up with a solution to the conflict, but actually understanding the history, understanding nationalism and Zionism and broader history, and really just empowering kids. And Jen, Ms. Martin, got incredible feedback from her students. So more to come. I will certainly keep the committee fully updated as this work progresses with the 10th grade history teachers and the history department.
Any questions for the superintendent? All right. Thank you very much, Superintendent Bott. We are on to subcommittee and liaison reports, and we have two vacancies in our subcommittee leaders, which I am thrilled to say I have persuaded colleagues to take up the mantle, and so it is with immense pleasure that I announced to the board that and the public that Miss Susan Wolf-Ditkoff has agreed to chair our finance subcommittee meeting for the coming year, and will no doubt ably do so with all of her expertise and acumen in business and finance, and that Mr. Glover has agreed to continue not only serving on the policy review subcommittee, but to chair it going forward. So this is a great pleasure to me to know that those two committees are going to be ably led in the coming year. Otherwise, today we won't make any changes in committee assignments, which is just what we do every year. There are quorums on all of the committees, and all committee meetings are posted and open meetings, and I encourage you, Mr. Perlman, and you, Ms. Monopoly, to make it to as many as you can. Check out what's going on at all of the committees, so you can not just hear it when it comes back to the full school committee, but see how the work gets done, and also meet that's when we get the more detailed presentations from staff in each of the various. We go through the documents, we give commentary, we ask questions, ask for whatever, sort of process it through, but also work closely with all of the leadership staff of the district. Also, you'll note that at the end of the subcommittee in liaison reports, we have liaison reports. So what you may not know is there's like 29 liaison assignments. It's really impressive. It's everything from relatively modest assignments. One of the assignments I've had since I joined school committee is I'm the liaison to the Brookline Adult and Community Education Advisory Board. That board meets usually 3 times a year. The board has had a few new members, but it's always good to check in with them and then bring back what's going on with adult ed, and which isn't just adult ed anymore, but with community ed in Brookline. And then at the other end are some liaison assignments to some kind of much more boards that do a whole lot more work, commissions, committees. Sometimes they're special committees that are put together by the select board or others. I'll give another example. Until recently, the town's open space plan was dated 2010, but in 2017 we did a new open space plan, and that was another assignment I took on. So I joined members of many other boards to work for about a year on the town's 2017 open space plan. So Robin may have already sent you a list of the liaison assignments, so you can just see what all of those are. And those meetings are those are all posted open meetings as well. They're not our meetings, but when we go. And the nature of a liaison is very specifically not a member of those boards, but simply someone who facilitates two-way communication between the school committee and these other organizations, so that we, in particular, I think the first part of that assignment is to, in my view, is to bring back to the school committee what we need to know about their work and what they need from us, what they're doing, and particularly what the overlaps are, what they need from us, what might be on the horizon, what issues might be of concern to us in this work that's happening throughout the town. But I think there's another there's another important aspect to it, which is to let them know what we're doing, which may be of interest to them. So we will go through our subcommittee reports. The Finance Subcommittee was scheduled to have a meeting on Monday, but the new Finance Subcommittee chair will be in Xi'an, China. And so that meeting has been rescheduled, or hasn't yet been rescheduled? Has not yet been rescheduled, so stay tuned. And I'm not sure that we have an override.
Yeah, good news. Come on.
That's the finance report, is the operating override passed, and lots of important things that need to be funded and will be funded. Ms. Ditkoff.
Thank you. This job's going to be a lot easier if you do my reports.
All right.
Just
you can just kick back.
I'm so excited.
Anything else from the, yeah. Well, I figured you hadn't had a whole lot of time to prepare.
Just that the annual town meeting is coming up, and they obviously will have thoughts on our budget as well. So,
Ms. Charlepsky, capital improvements.
So the capital subcommittee met on May 1st. We discussed the issue that we voted on earlier about the library. We also discussed the CIP, the Capital Improvements Program for 2020, and our part in that, and how we can get ahead of the process to know what's going to be in Charlie's CIP request. The head of the person who's in charge of our maintenance and repairs for the public schools and for many projects.
Well, he's the director of buildings for the town of Brookline, Charlie Simmons.
Thank you. I'd forgotten his exact title. But either way, what our goal is that in August we would be able to discuss this preliminary CIP and give feedback to the town, to Mr. Simmons, about the CIP. The vote on the CIP that we do is in November or December. And there would be a joint public hearing with the select board, I guess, before that is voted. We talked about our rental facilities, use of buildings, and the allocation of utilities funds, so that when we charge rent, we also charge, there's some monies that are for the utilities, and how that money, it's sort of an inside type of transfer from our budget to the building director's budget to make sure that the utilities are paid for. We discussed the transportation policy plan, and we are still waiting for a date from the transportation board. I don't know if Ms. Dunn has any update on a date. We don't have a date. Will it happen in this? We don't know if it's going to be happening. Okay, to be discussed further. I will be pushing them to get this on their docket or agenda before the end of the year. This has to do, for those people who are new, parking for teachers at schools. The transportation board 2 years ago put a moratorium on any further special permits for teachers to park, and so there were some schools that already had parking plans and permits, and those were in place. There's Driscoll and Lincoln School that don't have that, and the high school doesn't have it, though they've sort of okayed the high school. I mean, the high school has a plan, but not for the expansion once it expands. So the issue was, for them, they put a moratorium on it till a transportation demand management system was in place, which is the shortcut term for that is, how else can we get people to work without taking their own cars? Whether it's carpooling, whether it's some sort of incentive to take the train, to the T, take public transportation, buses, etc. They got a report on the transportation demand system, and I know I'm taking more time probably than you guys want to hear right now, but this was almost a year ago, and it's up to the town now to implement it, because this is not just for the schools, it's also for the town. the whole transportation demand system. Town has workers who come also here. So at this point, we feel very strongly that they should be taking this up on their agenda and giving us, figuring out a parking plan for both the Lincoln School and the Driscoll School. We've heard numerous complaints from the Lincoln School parents who live on Hedge Road and how there is no parking on their street when they wake up in the morning. And they can't get in, they can't get out, etc. So we're trying to push them to discuss this and work with us together on this. The Todd Corain, who is the Director of Transportation, has worked on us with us on the plan. So we're hoping to get it on their agenda soon. We talked about the leases that we've already discussed, so I'm not going to repeat. And you also talked about repopulating devotion, which we also discussed. So that was basics of what went on at the Capital Subcommittee meeting. Yes? Yes, absolutely. I wasn't done, but yeah, Ms. Ditkoff, could you give us an update on the high school project? Huh? But no, I'm done with that. So, I'm sorry. Oh, the CM at risk. So yes, I'm sorry. That wasn't part of this meeting, but for the high school project, we're hiring a construction management at risk. We're doing that way of having a construction company do the construction of the building. We've put out an RFP. We've gotten responses. We've whittled down the responses, I think, to 5 companies, rather large companies like that you've seen the name around town: Consigli, Suffolk. Help me, David. William Rich.
W.T. Rich.
W.T. Rich. Okay. Gilbane.
And you're doing interviews?
And no, so we're meeting on the 21st to discuss the their responses. We haven't gotten them yet, and to discuss when we will be doing interviews. Yes, we will be doing interviews. Okay. We got the money also in the override for the high school. That's the other good news. I think that's all for capital.
Great. Any questions on capital projects? Oh.
I just want to share, if you remember in the fall, the committee asked Mr. Simmons to work in the development of the CIP to climate control the 3rd floor of Lawrence, the 3rd floor of Lincoln, and the back hallway of Heath, the hallway along the parking lot, the side of the hallway along the parking lot. Mr. Simmons has been struggling with what was allocated in the budget and the scope of that project. And for a while was unsure he would be able to do all of it, and actually was fearful he would only be able to do half. But in the last few days, he has successfully negotiated with someone who bid on the project. And if town meeting approves his budget, he will be able to install the climate control in all 3 of the schools as requested by the school committee. And if town meeting approves it, he will order the equipment the day after town meeting, with the goal of it being installed by September 1.
This is the most fabulous news.
In these 3 locations, in these 3 schools, are just the hot boxes. The west side of Heath, and then under the
with the reflection off
under
the parking
lot. and then the top floor under the roof at the other 2 schools, and in September and in May, and particularly in June, there are days when teaching is and learning is suboptimal. So this is great. All right, Ms. Scotto, do you have a curriculum report?
Last week we had a school improvement plan meeting at Runkle, which, as usual, was well attended and lively. Both teachers and parents and several members of the school, no, actually it was just Susan and I were there. I don't think Helen came. But were you there? No. Yeah, that's what I said. In any event, a lot of attention. There's a new format for writing school improvement plans this year, and there was a lot of attention given to that and what certain things meant, but it was all done. They had things laid out, and they were just not quite sure of the format of it. The conversation continued, and I left my notes home, and I'm so tired I can't remember what it was about. Do you?
Sorry, which one?
The Runkle.
What they were talking about?
Yeah.
So the majority of it was talking about the, in the context of what you said about the school improvement plan, we focused most of the time that I was there on the literacy piece and the literacy goals. There were a number of parents who wanted more quantitative goals that were envisioned in the plan, so that was a topic of conversation. There were also people who were asking about whether there could be additional goals that were not in the template. So right now the template has a goal around literacy, a goal around math, and a goal around climate and culture, and so there was a question that was raised about what about the other school goals, and the answer, I think the discussion as I recall it was, of course there are other goals, you should write them down and have discussions about them. I think this was just making sure that there was at least, at least those three were consistent across, those three conversations were happening across all of the school improvement plans, but that was not to the exclusion of other goals in a building. So those were the pieces that I had.
Good. I will eventually catch up on my sleep. But we've had two school improvement plans today. This morning we had our regular, not school, you see what state my mind is in. This morning we had our regular curriculum meeting, and at that, the first thing we discussed was what was the space at Lincoln going to be used for next year in connection with the high school. And the transitions program, which is the program that deals with students who did not graduate at age 18 because they had special needs, they will stay here in many cases until they're 22. That will be moved over, most likely, to the old Lincoln School, and might work very well. There were some comments and questions about it, the sense of not wanting to make it a special ed school entirely, so that it looked as if our special ed students, there was nothing there but special ed. And the other piece that is important is we don't know clearly if devotion's going to be out of there. So there's this question of, if something happens that devotion can't be moved, and we've made all these plans to move the special ed programs over there, not all the special ed, but this transitions program, how do we deal with that, and when do we know that that's going to happen? And that was the first part of the program. The second part of the program was the BHS competency report, where we looked at the breakdown of students and their how they did on the MCAS test, students by race, by income, etc. And we had some questions about what the report said, what we needed to do about it. There were 2 children in 2017 who did not ever get the competency, they didn't pass the MCAS test. So not that we want to know who the children were, but there were 2 the year before as well. And what are the categories that these students are falling into? And what do we need to do to make them much more successful? So we will probably come back to that, because we gave questions to Dr. Gittens, and we will get back to that. When that discussion was all finished, we adjourned to the STEPS presentation that was going on for the parents, and that was I think very good. They were very clear about the difference between steps for Steps for Success Incorporated versus the Steps for Success program, and whose responsibility was what. And yes, we do have that presentation, and Ms. Sharlovsky is holding it up in our packet. Tonight we had another curriculum meeting, and we met with the two interim principals who were at Leslie Ryan Miller from Pierce and Susie Talukdar, I do it wrong every time, who was at Pierce. And we asked them about the highlights. Driscoll. I'm telling you, I need sleep. I'm much better when I've had enough sleep, and I haven't. Susie talked about the highlights for the year, and a lot of them had to do with the development of community. She spends a certain part of each day walking the halls of the school, going into the classroom, sitting, listening to see what happens. And I think the result has been that the teachers feel she's very much engaged in the programs that they're doing and with their students. And the thing that I think that is that is excellent that she has done is that she has really restored a sense of community to that school. People feel that she understands what they're trying to do. They feel that she knows what's going on in the school and in the halls, and I think she has been very successful in changing the tone of that school. It was very interesting because her answers to the questions about highlights and what she was going to continue to do were quite different from Leslie Ryan Miller. Leslie Ryan Miller talked quite a great deal about data and how she's using data in the schools, and how she's emphasizing with the teachers that this is not about, oh, your children didn't do well or your children didn't do well. This is our responsibility, and she has had a great deal of staff buy-in. The teachers are working very, very cooperatively and using data to see how they can improve the skills that the students are learning. And both of those people have been very enthusiastically received by the staff there, and they have been appointed the regular principals. And in both cases, I certainly heard from staff that they would go on strike if these people were not appointed principal, because they were so enthusiastic about working for them. So, and we have another meeting tomorrow morning at Heath at 8 o'clock. It's a school improvement plan meeting, so if you'd like to attend, please join us there.
Thank you. Ms. Charlovsky, Government Relations.
So apparently, I heard on the radio coming here that the Senate Ways and Means budget passed, and I'm looking here online, and it passed at $41.42 billion budget, not million, billion, for the state for next year. And Mr. Bott informed me that in that budget is a 75% reimbursement for the circuit breaker, which is huge. It will really help a great deal. More to come, because that's only the first step. Then they have to go to reconciliation with the House Ways and Means budget, and then that has to go to the governor to sign. So this is a process, as everybody knows. It happens every year. It takes forever for them to get to their budget, but hopefully by July 1st they will have one, and we'll know exactly what the effect is on us.
Thank you. Mr. Glover, do you have further policy review committee report?
Just a little bit. We met on, I believe, May 2nd, at which time we spent a lot of time talking about the homeschool policy that we talked about tonight. In addition, we spent a good bit of time talking about changes to the draft meal charge policy, if I remember correctly, particularly related to removing any provisions in there that are punitive to students in the event that they run a negative balance. I think we used to have language in the draft that talked about an alternative meal in the event that in the event that there was a deficient balance as an option, and removing that from our policy to avoid any issues related to shaming or anything like that. And our next meeting is June 6th.
Thank you. Are there additional liaison and updates? Ms. Jones?
So I went to the Beep Connections meeting, the last one of the year, yesterday, and it was a great meeting, as it always is. I know I always come back really excited when I've gone to those meetings because of the collaboration that happens in town between different town departments, between private and public, and I can talk about the summer programs, but I was thinking about it, that BEEP is going to be providing for at-risk kids, the launch program, et cetera. But I think maybe if either the superintendent could give us a report on those summer programs at the next meeting, or have Ms. Milstein come and talk about it, I think that would be great, because we do some exceptional stuff for kids who are at risk over the summer to make sure they don't fall behind, that they have those experiences that other kids have. And I think I wouldn't do it justice if I were to try and talk about it, because I'm not sure I would get everything. So that would be great. And the other thing that they're doing, and I didn't understand it exactly, but it sounds like fun, there's a Village Day story walk. So within Brookline Village, there will be a storybook that's put up, I think, in different windows. It's happening on June 10th, and it'll be up all summer, but they're doing it as a party and stuff on June 10th, and I think there's ice cream available at one of the spots. So each storefront would have, I guess, part of the... I don't really know what a story walk is. I was listening, but I'm not sure. It sounded interesting. They also talked about the STEM Saturdays with... my big guy in me is the way it was presented. It's actually a grant that we got from the Department of Early Education and Care to have, the grant is specifically to have males who are involved in kids' lives come to these STEM programs. We got a little pushback, of course, and it's open to anybody who wants to come, but you know, it is certainly open to any males that want to come with their guardian, child, whatever, their significant person, to these STEM Saturdays where they do all sorts of fun things in the science field. So that I think has just ended.
Can I just add, it's the grant is specifically as you described, but we invite anyone to participate, regardless of gender.
Correct. So. Thank you. And the last thing is that Molly Zucker, who was the chair of the Beep Connections, is stepping down from that chairmanship. She's going on to further education, actually, at Brandeis. And so we're very excited for her, and I'm not sure who's going to be chair next year. In the Porch Fest on June 9th, there's a Porch Fest with free music at like 20 locations around town. I think it's going to be in the tabs, certainly, of where those places are and where to go to. And that's it. Oh, there was a gala, actually, for the Brookline. This is second liaison. So you asked which liaisons there are. This is one of them. Another one is the Brookline Community Mental Health Center had their gala on Saturday, just this last Saturday night it was. God, it seems so long ago with the election and all. It was fantastic. I think there were about 300 people there. They made a lot of money for the center, and the center supports the schools in many ways in terms of mental health care and issues and teaching and programming for the schools. So, was there something else?
So the only thing that I was going to say is, and Ms. Scotto should speak for herself, but I found it incredibly moving, the student speaker, who did a terrific job. So that's the only other thing I would say, just in terms of the range of.
And what the student speaker actually spoke to was how the community came together for him in so many ways, how the center, he used almost every aspect of the center, whether it was individual treatment, whether it was a group treatment, a group housing that they have available, and the high school, and coordinating efforts. I mean, I think that's the beauty of this town, where people really work together, whether it's the police, the mental health center, the housing authority, the schools. We work together to try and, I mean, you don't always succeed, but you really we work together to help kids who are having troubles. So, I think, any other questions?
Other reports? Yes, Ms. Dickoff.
Thank you. Also on Saturday night was the Brookline Library Foundation event, which was lovely. Ms. Scotto and I attended that. I don't know if anybody else was there. There were many, many people. It was in the Coolidge Corner Library, and it was celebrating the upcoming renovation of the Coolidge Corner Library. So that was terrific, and it was great. Another great cause to support.
All right. Is there new business to come before the committee?
I'm wondering if Superintendent Bach could just address the field testing with Pearson on the computer-based MCAS. The letter said that it was tomorrow, but I heard that it was today.
Actually, Mr. Lemus will come share an update.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, folks. So, the MCAS field testing and question tryouts for the computer-based testing will have to start at the high school next year, or the high schools across the state next year. It took place today. The original notice to students and families said it was going to take place May 11th, like you saw. Immediately after that was sent out on May 1st, the high school realized their mistake. They sent a notice to students immediately thereafter, and then to parents on May 3rd. The state has required, I should say, all schools, all high schools in the Commonwealth to participate in the testing. They were assigned either, in the field testing and question tryouts, I should say. They were assigned either to do the ELA or the math assessment. BHS was assigned the ELA, English Language Arts assessment. The purpose of the field testing question tryouts, as explained to us and across the state by the Department of Ed, is sort of threefold. One, to try to test questions that will be used on the next generation assessments to understand if they're valid and if they're actually assessing what they mean to. To help teachers, administrators, and IT departments prepare to administer this test next year by having a trial run, basically. And then also develop next generation practice tests and resources that schools can use to help prepare students next year at the high school level when they start doing computer-based tests. Today, the high school completed the field test. As I said, 125 sophomores were selected to take that test. Their classes were selected to represent to make up the demographics of the high school. That was recommended and really required by the Department of Education. We want a representative group testing it for obvious reasons. According to Hal Mason, a handful of students opted not to participate today. I think it's fewer than 10, but he didn't give me an exact number. Mr. Mason also reported that the high school staff and administrators who participated found it very useful for a couple of reasons. One, they got a much better understanding of what the students will be doing, a much better understanding of the logistics that it'll take to pull it off successfully for when all 10th graders do it. And also our ed tech and IT teams who have been collaborating over the last few weeks or month or so got a much better understanding of how to set it up and support it at the high school. They've been doing the computer-based testing. They've done in 2017 and this year, we've done computer-based testing for MCAS at the elementary levels. Last year was 4th and 7th grades. This year, principals chose to expand it to 4th through 8th. Even though they didn't have to necessarily do all those grades, they found administering them and supporting the students was much easier with the computer-based tests. We'll do 3rd grade next year.
I can also address, we looked into the concern that a parent raised. One parent did reach out to express concern about Pearson Learning, which is the company that the Department of Ed has worked with for many years to develop and administer the tests. Citing a Washington Post blog, the parent raised concerns about the way Pearson tests its products. The blog reported that Pearson had conducted a study using one of its products at the college level called MyLab Programming. It's a software product used by college students to do coding exercises as part of their collegiate course of study. In that study, Pearson inserted encouraging language into the programs used by some colleges to test to see if these messages they were putting in there sort of help the students, encourage the students to persevere when they're having trouble, whether to start new problems, that sort of thing, to see if they could persist. One of the primary concerns around that is that the students weren't notified that Pearson was doing this and testing their product. One of the primary concerns raised by the parent was whether or not Pearson is doing that sort of social psychological testing through the MCAS field test. Another concern raised was whether or not the school or district should notify parents about that possibility and whether we should give families the choice to opt out if that was happening. In following up on this concern, I reached out today personally to the Department of Ed and to Pearson. I was able to speak to a staff member in the Student Assessment Office at the Department of Ed, and also have a call and email into the Associate Commissioner in charge of Student Assessment. She was out today. I expect to hear from her tomorrow. I also reached out to Pearson and talked to a person there, but I'm waiting to hear back about what they would say, and we're expecting confirmation that that type of testing wasn't happening in this case. We have no reason to expect it was. We do know, as I said earlier, that the part of the testing was around testing the validity of test questions. That has happened for many years through the written tests and is a pretty common practice and also acknowledged by Pearson and Department of Ed. So at this point, we don't have any reason to believe that this was happening. If I find out differently, I'll certainly inform the superintendent, who will inform you. But that's what we've learned so far.
So really, thank you for delving into all that and looking into all that. I do think it's concerning. Pearson is a multi-billion with a B dollar company, and we're doing their field test. I don't know what we get for that. I mean, except for disruption to learning for students, disruption for the staff. I understand they put in test questions every year for the next year, but to do a whole test on a separate occasion seems to me excessive and really not even fair to the students. 125 students were picked. I mean, I don't think they won the lottery. I would say it was the opposite. And it's just not a fun thing to do anyway, and they're not getting their class instruction, and then teachers are pulled for proctoring. So I understand you're saying it's coming from the state, but at some point we might want to say, I'm not suggesting maybe tonight, but it's just something to think about, that Pearson just can't come in, I don't think, and say, here, you have to take this test. They went through the state, but it's not the right thing to do.
I don't mean any way to defend Pearson. I want to clarify one thing. Is that it wasn't Pearson coming in and doing this test. It was the State Department of Education testing the next generation MCAS. The MCAS that students will take next year. So I wasn't sure if that was clear or not. But
well, it's Pearson's doing it though. It's their field test.
Yeah, I think, Ms. Huddersfield, your points are well taken. I think that the difference for the high school, and I am certainly not defending anyone, but process different. If you remember back when the online tests were field tested in grades 3 through 8, students were given that or the paper test in lieu of, so you did one or the other, and if you did the field test, it just was a year where you did it and there was nothing reported to families and or to districts across the Commonwealth. My sense is because this is a graduation requirement, the Department of Education opted to do it this way. I'm not, again,
well,
I'm not defending, I'm just talking
about
the process.
They've already taken the test, so this is an additional test they're taking.
For sure. I'm not.
And
yeah.
I mean, that you could. No, he said 10th graders. They've already taken MCAS.
It was 10th.
No, you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah. And so perhaps, if we ever are required to do this again, perhaps the letter would say, if you wish to opt out, this is what you should do. I know the state doesn't want you to, but you could do that. It won't hurt anything if there's no consequences to the student for opting out, and perhaps they should know that that's a possibility.
One of the things that might be helpful, this is all in retrospect, but maybe if this were to come up again, it could be brought, I don't know how much lead time you had on this, but if it could be brought to curriculum subcommittee so it could be discussed, and these issues wouldn't be an issue then going forward. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Ditkoff.
Thank you. One other update. The advisory committee took up warrant article 23 after our discussion. I apprised them of our vote, and they voted 12 to 2 to 9 favorable action on the devotion renaming. So that is that's going to town meeting, and I guess the select board still has to take it up. But that was and I think that was the last vote except for the select board.
Thank you. All right, is there any other new business to come before this committee? So, our new year on school committee is off and running, and I will see you all at our next meeting. Next stand.